morning, everyone. I don't know if I've ever started a conference where everyone was so quiet and reverential and sat in their seats when they were told to, so thank you. Welcome to the 10th Annual Family Online Safety Institute Conference. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sarah Holland. I'm a Public Policy Manager at Google, and I also have the great honor and privilege of being chair of the FOSI board. So I'm very excited about this year's conference because it is my first as chair. And I just want to take a moment before we kind of dive in and acknowledge the FOSI staff who have done incredible work organizing this conference, getting all the speakers. It's absolutely chocked full of great content and speakers, lots of great papers that are coming out of this conference. So if you would join me and give a round of applause to the FOSI staff. They make it look easy and good, but I know it took an incredible amount of work. It's wonderful to be back here at the museum. We held our second annual conference here in 2008, also during a time of transition. But to those of you who are new at FOSI, which it's great to see some new faces, it's also great to see a lot of friends that have been with FOSI from the beginning who have joined our journey. So it's nice to see folks like Ann Collier and Larry Magid, who I've known have been really in online safety from the beginning, to see new folks like Patricia at Twitter, my fellow board member, Alan from the I Keep Safe, and the other Alan from the American Libraries Association. So really some great speakers. So I hope you take advantage of that and join us at the networking reception afterwards. But FOSI's mission is to make the online world safer for kids and their families through the 3 Ps. And if you've ever been around Stephen Balcom, you've heard him say this. The enlightened public policy, industry best practices, and good digital parenting. And the theme of our conference this year is online safety and transition, and what a good year it is to have that as a theme. The title reflects both the remarkable challenges and opportunities brought by new technology, which we'll talk about later today, but also the transition from one U.S. administration to another. The diverse and wide-ranging agenda we have created today captures these new realities. So thank you very much for coming at this critical time. I very much hope that you will actively engage in the plenary sessions, the breakouts, the exhibits. Join us at the networking drink. Come talk to your fellow participants and speakers. Just so you know, for the first time, we'll be live streaming the plenary sessions of the conference. And we have a conference app where you can find the program, where you can find speaker bios, the numerous links to relevant papers, one of which we'll hear in just a few minutes, videos, resources throughout the day. So I definitely encourage you to visit fosiconference.org and find all that. I would also like to say, as part of coming here and hosting the conference at the museum, you get free tickets to the museum. You can pick those up at the registration. So if you haven't had a chance to visit the museum itself, I encourage you to do that. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce FOSI's founder and CEO, Stephen Balcom. And I'll borrow a phrase I heard earlier today, the man, the myth, the legend, who's really been a driving force of FOSI and really helped it become this incredible convening power and bringing all you different kinds of people from all different kinds of perspectives and backgrounds here. So without further ado, Mr. Stephen Balcom.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Sarah. And I want to echo her words of thanks to the FOSI staff team, because this is our first year in 5 years that we haven't had our events coordinator, Amy, who many of you got to know over the last few years. And so everyone has really pitched in together to make this happen. So thank you very much for that. Also, thank you for your support. And I want to begin by acknowledging our sponsors. Our gold sponsors of Amazon, AT&T, Comcast, Google, Microsoft, and Verizon. Silver sponsors, CTIA, Facebook, Meet Me, TeenSafe, and Twitter, and also to Hogan Lovells, Netflix, and Snapchat. And I know this is a time-honored thing to say, but again, without their financial support, we would simply not be here today. So I would like actually to embarrass them all by asking them, the sponsors and the FOSI board members, please to stand up and be recognized. Round of applause. So I'd also like to add my welcome to this, our 10th annual conference. as you heard, we have a tremendous range of keynotes and plenaries and breakouts and exhibitors that cover the full spectrum of online safety issues, from cyberbullying to the Internet of Things, from connected toys, and you'll be hearing and seeing those a lot today, to the digital lives of African American tweens. We're going to hear about the latest technology tools to help protect kids online, the newest thinking about online privacy, and we'll hear best practices from around the world. And we have folks who have traveled from around the world to be here today. So please get your hands on the exhibits, the interactive toys and devices that are out just outside of the hall here, and get to see where this extraordinary movement is taking us. And also, please stay with us to the end of the day when we will have drinks and very nice refreshments upstairs, an opportunity for you to connect and to reconnect with the wonderful, vibrant community that is the online safety world. So we have come a long way since 2007, the very first year that we gathered. That was the year that the iPhone was launched. And it brought with it a sea change in the way that we thought about online safety. No longer were kids and young adults sitting at a desktop tethered to the wall by power and other cables. They were walking around with the internet in their pockets. And they were using devices that had more computing power than NASA had at its disposal to put two men on the moon in 1969. And here we are 10 years later, and we are experiencing a new shift, one that builds on the mobile platforms that we've all become accustomed to. But now we see the promise of the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual and augmented reality devices, all converging into new and unknowable futures. We are seeing toys, tools, personal assistants, and even robots that no longer need screens or keyboards to interact with. We are seeing our cars, if we're lucky enough to have a Tesla, being upgraded from the cloud and gaining levels of autonomy unthinkable a decade ago. We are seeing our educational systems being reinvented and redrawn as technology makes greater inroads into our classrooms and lecture halls. And we are connecting and communicating in ways that bring us together instantaneously around the world, but that can, at the same time, isolate us into our own echo chambers and ideological bubbles. We see what happens when fake news infects our feeds, when online taunts and tweets are used to intimidate or drown out our civil discourse. We see how these extraordinary platforms can be manipulated to spread hate and extremism and used to recruit for lethal purposes. And we watched a presidential campaign and election unfold in real time on social media without the filters and editorial decisions that have traditionally been a part of our democratic process. 8 years ago, from this very stage, we marked the transition from one U.S. administration to another. As some of you will recall, Andrew McLaughlin, who later became the Deputy CTO for the United States, joined us from the Obama transition team to outline many of the tech initiatives that the new administration was considering. Over the past 8 years, we've been pleased to see this current administration take steps to address online safety issues, from convening cyberbullying events to engaging stakeholders on the Lockdown Your Login campaign, to issuing reports on emerging technology issues such as artificial intelligence. Just last year, we were joined at our conference by the Deputy CTO, Alexander McGilvray. Additionally, we have seen activity on the Hill in recent years on student data privacy, revenge porn, and the Internet of Things. And as the new Congress begins in January, we look forward to working with the new and current members on these and more issues. So in this election cycle, we approached both presidential campaigns with our own proposals. And then, after the election, we invited members of the Trump transition team to join us here today. Unfortunately, no one from the team was able to be with us. We have also noted that the next First Lady has committed to focusing on the issue of cyberbullying, and we stand ready to work with her on tackling that very challenging issue. We will continue our outreach to the new administration and after this conference today, and we will call upon the White House to take the issue of online safety seriously and thoughtfully. To take an evidence-based, not a fear-based approach. To emphasize the need to create a culture of responsibility online and pursue reasonable government oversight and support. To acknowledge the risks, mitigate the harms, while remaining focused on the rewards that digital technology can bring. And so, to that end, we ask the new administration to do the following 4 things. First, to create the post of Chief Online Safety Officer in the Office of the CTO to bring together the online safety efforts across the administration and departments, including the FTC, FCC, Departments of Education, Commerce, Justice, and State, as well as the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Secondly, to create a cross-agency online safety working group chaired by the Chief Online Safety Officer to regularly convene relevant government departments involved in online safety work and to hear from relevant industry, NGO, and academic bodies on these issues. Thirdly, to establish an annual White House Online Safety Summit, bringing together leaders in government, industry, NGOs, education, and science to address the concerns and challenges, particularly for children and young people online, as well as to highlight the best practices and the many positive benefits of our online lives. And lastly, to create a $25 million research and education fund over 5 years to benchmark the various trust and safety indices and to create evidence-based educational programs and messaging for children and their parents. Some of you will know the European Commission-funded EU Kids Online, for instance, is a good model for creating the objective baseline of research upon which educational efforts can be built. With these proposals in place, parents and caregivers will be better equipped and empowered to protect their children while giving them the freedom to explore, create, and share online. Tech companies can bring attention to the many trust, safety, and privacy measures they have already put in place and will be encouraged to stay ahead of the curve as new technologies, apps, and services are deployed. The US government will have improved coordination and information about online safety risks and be better placed to steer policy responses. And the academic community will have the ability to conduct sound research and develop evidence-based curricula across age groups and ability levels to better identify and respond to the challenges and opportunities of our digital world. And we hope you will join us in this endeavor, and we look forward to engaging more with the transition team and the next administration to work towards these goals. Let us all use the extraordinary power of social media, apps, and other platforms to rebuild community, to foster trust, and deepen empathy among users, young and old, to remind ourselves of our core principles and values, and to be good digital role models to our own children and young people, and to make the online world safer, more inclusive, and a more tolerant place for digital citizens everywhere. Thank you very much.
I'm afraid you're going to see me a bit more today. Thank you for that, Stephen. It was excellent opening framing for the rest of the conference today. Next, I'm delighted to introduce a very good friend of FOSI, Mr. Jules Polonetsky, the CEO of the Future of Privacy Forum, a think tank focused on advancing responsible data practices. He will introduce a joint FPF-FOSI white paper entitled Kids in the Connected Home, the benefit, and I see we have some connected devices here. Kids in the Connected Home, the benefits and privacy implications of connected dolls, talking dinosaurs, and battling robots. So it should be an interesting presentation. You can find a link to the paper at our conference app, fosiconference.org. So Jules.
Thank you, Sarah, Stephen. Great to see so many friends here this morning. And I was cheered up by seeing some folks I hadn't seen in a while because I had some bad news this morning. I got on my Wi-Fi scale, which I get on every morning, and it's a smart scale. So it updates, it connects to remote servers, and it's my personal little way to kind of keep in touch with what actually is sort of happening every single day in the world of technology, because this scale keeps updating. And I used to get on and it would give me my weight and I could take a look and see it on the app later in the day. You know, when you're on the scale, you're like you're in your underwear, right? You don't want that extra like 4 ounces of your like t-shirt or anything like that. And so you're standing there and it now started giving me the weather. When I look down, it says it gives you the weight and then it gives you the weather, which is kind of useful because you haven't really gotten dressed yet. So that was kind of cool. But I was like, wow, it just got some new features automatically. Just turn that on. That's kind of interesting. What will it do tomorrow? So I got on just recently, and it has a new feature now. It has, after it shows you your weight and it shows you the weather, it then shows you this little trend line showing how you have done over the last couple of days or weeks. Well, it's after Thanksgiving, so I jumped on, and all of a sudden, here's this like trend line in the morning, like starting off my day with this kind of like, beware. So it's kind of useful, but it got me thinking, right? Because like, what else is in there? I mean, I don't think it has a microphone or a camera, but what new features are going to update? And am I going to know about them? And will they be collecting information about me and my underwear, or my family, or my kids, or other information about me? And so as we started looking at connected toys, we sort of had in mind, okay, really fun, interesting stuff, but what are the implications? And by the way, are we covered by the relevant privacy laws? I have 2 young teens, and you know they squabble a little bit. And I had an Amazon Echo in my house, and they've been enjoying it. And then we just got the Google Home device, and I was a little worried about how these two would get along with each other. And it turns out the older sibling, the Echo, pretty much ignores the Google device. You know, if you say, well, what do you think of you know, Google Home? It's like, I don't have any information on that. But the Google device, the younger sibling, which we just got and is a little bit newer to the market, it has all kinds of little catchy comebacks and sort of funny asides. It says, well, the Echo is sort of tall and slim with that cool blue light, but I'm kind of cozy in here. It has these little sort of remarks. And I'm thinking, okay, this is not yet science fiction, but different things in my house are talking to each other and having this little sort of side conversation. Okay, interesting, as I start thinking about my kids interacting with these things. But they're jaded, they're kids, they're like, looking at their phones and pads, and they rarely look up. They like playing music on the smart devices. But when I brought home Chip, the smart dog, they actually paid attention. He doesn't look all that exciting now because he's not connected to anything. But in addition to following commands, he recognizes their voices. When he does things that you like, you give it a little like on a little bracelet, and he learns that that's what you like. He even does yoga, which I'll maybe demonstrate later when we have him on the table. He will actually, you say, Chip, do yoga, and he barks to let you know he knows. And then the coolest thing is when his battery's low, on his own, he decides to go take a walk, and he goes over to his charging station in the corner, and he kind of pops his butt down, and he starts charging himself, right? So not science fiction, not that expensive. Yeah, I get to spend the company budget on playing with this kind of stuff, so it's actually a lot of fun. But I guess, and I don't know if any of you have seen Steven. Steven's been traveling around with this Dino, who is actually connected to IBM's Watson, supercomputing, and it does some phenomenal things and can answer the most unique and remarkable questions that your kid answers. So let's start analyzing this, because I find that when we start looking at some of the industry definitions, which are focused on what is the business category and so forth. So the titles that the industry gives are sort of toys to life and sort of robotics. From our point of view, as folks who care about privacy and data, we realized that we had to start categorizing him a bit differently, because Chip is awfully smart, but he actually doesn't connect to the internet. Now, he connects to a little ball that he can chase around, he can follow you, and so forth, but his processing is all packed into this device. And for many of us, technology and toys isn't anything new. We all know about, pull string, talking dolls, or, it's somewhat remote-controlled race cars and the like. So not brand new, but what is new is the amount of processing and intelligence that we can put into this device that then interacts with my child. If it's not connecting to the internet, however, it's not going to be covered by COPPA, and the privacy issues are different, right? Obviously, we care about this sociologically. How is this thing interacting with my child? But it's when this thing gets online, when it's connected to the internet, when it uses HTTP, that the COPPA drafters had that sharing data remotely online. Okay, so I guess we've answered the first question. We've seen Senator Warner write to the FTC. We've seen people start asking questions. Well, these aren't websites, they're not apps. We know that the FTC has made it very clear that COPPA covers those, but what about a teddy bear, with a chip in it? Is it covered? And our conclusion from the report, which I hope you'll take a look at, was certainly, if you look closely at the language, when it's connected to the internet, when it is an online service, it certainly is. And I know a lot of people grumbled back when the FTC interpreted the COPPA rule to include IP addresses, right? We said, don't they know you just collect an IP address when you go to the site, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it may have been prescient, because some of these things, even if they aren't sending any other information, when they're connecting to the internet, they are obviously sending an IP address, so they end up being caught by COPPA. Now, if that's all they do, they may be carved out and subject to some exceptions and not come along with a host of requirements. But that actual change, and at the end of the day, has the COPPA rule sweeping really, really broadly. Okay, so smart doesn't mean connected, and connected doesn't mean smart, right? The device can just be remotely controlled. The most powerful devices are both smart and connected, because they're using cloud computing, so they actually can understand your child, different accents, if we want them to understand kids with different abilities to speak and the like, different languages. We want to be inclusive. Certainly the power of cloud computing to be able to provide those responses and to do it in a way that's understandable is critical. All right, so the second question that people raise is, yeah, but COPPA, I fill in a form, I get verified consent. Where's the screen? So how can you possibly get permission? Well, the reality is most of these things are controlled by apps, and certainly apps are covered by COPPA. Plus, that's where these devices typically go to let you hook them up to the internet. So maybe one day they'll have some screens, and we'll worry about whether you can sort of peck in your verified consent there today. But today, all the devices we looked at seem to be clearly and easily seeking consent by using related apps that give that the power. So I don't know that we need a COPPA update there. I think we do have a pretty wide scope when we look at the language, and we can be pretty sure that these things are covered. Well, what about that Echo and that Google Home device, these sort of general devices? My kids are in the house. They are interacting with my kids. Of course, they're interacting with our entire family. And when the drafters of COPPA debated the issue, clearly there were going to be websites or services that had broad audiences, and of course there are always going to be some kids in that audience, and folks did debate, well, is there some way that, well, if there's kids, maybe you need to figure out that. And of course the burden on users, as I think the drafters and the folks who thought about it said, was, well, that means every single person, to screen out maybe some minority of children, every single person is going to have to constantly be signing in and constantly verifying. So I'm certainly walking into my living room, and I don't want to have to be adult password, so now you can talk to me, and now this is one of my children. Well, they're getting the other way, of course, that COPPA kicks in addition to making a decision as to whether or not this thing is aimed and targeted at children. Of course, if we had a, Echo for Kids, that would be a different story. But the general home pieces, I think the FTC has been pretty clever. But the other way that you end up, of course, as many of you know, get captured by COPPA's jurisdiction is whether you have actual knowledge, right? So even if I'm aimed at that general audience, if I ask for age and I know age, then I'm obviously on the hook. We're talking. These things are listening. So isn't my kid's personal information being identified and recognized? So the reality is what these devices, as smart as they are today, typically do, frankly, is not voice recognition. They do speech recognition, right? They learn words. They are by no means yet sophisticated enough, maybe one day, to tell the difference between a 9-year-old squeaky-voiced boy and a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, or a high-pitched male voice or a high-pitched adult voice. Impossible today, and today the companies actually don't technically in any way yet have actual knowledge. Maybe in the future one day, because my kids can actually say things to the device, maybe I want my kids, my wife, my cousin who comes in, maybe I would like different accounts, and I do want maybe some biometric relationship. So I assume we'll debate sort of the pros and cons of biometrics, but one day the technology may get us there. But today I think it's pretty clear that these are general home devices and that they're not aimed at kids and that they don't have actual knowledge. And so these are some of the questions I think that are being raised. So all of you know that when you interact with COPPA, as you start being asked for personal information, that's where we're presented the notice. So I think we bought these online, but lots of people are going to be buying these in stores. Now, what good is it if you buy something in the store and you take it home, and it only works if you connect it online and you create an account and you have your kids' information going to the cloud, and it says, okay, do you give permission? What are you going to do? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't really want to do that. Well, you got it already. It's home. It's in that box, right? So one of the things we call for in the report is, you know what, could we give you a clue? I don't know that I want a privacy policy on the box in the store. No one's going to read that. But could we make sure that people making these purchases, if it's going to be dependent on sharing personal information, kind of too late when my kid is yelling, set it up, set it up. What do you mean you don't want to give permission? Now, is that feasible? Is that possible? We're asking people to put like notices on boxes? No, but there's some smart ways to do this. And let's take a look. So this is not a tiny little startup. This is Fisher-Price. And sure enough, on the box, it says, hey, mom and dad, you'll be glad to know no personally identifiable information is transmitted by this smart toy. Good news yet, right? Another company might say, maybe something like, hey, needs an online account in order to activate all the features of the like, right? Just so that parents have some clue and can make a smart decision. So that's something I think not required by COPPA, but which I think would be practical and would be really useful. Okay. Couple of key last tips. Security, right? We've all read about these DDoS attacks where items, home cameras and so forth were used to attack. Imagine your home toys being used to, be involved in attacks. We, the policy and advocacy community need to make sure that we understand what to be asking the manufacturers and the toy providers to do. I was among many who, when I heard about Hello Barbies, oh, how could that? Oh my God, what's going to happen? Bad people will come in and, interact with my kids, or turn Barbie into a fierce, microphone in the home. And then when we actually looked really closely at it, they did an amazing amount of really smart, careful, technical security work. So one video of one of the leading hackers saying, I've been able to get into just every smart home device except for 2, and one of those was, Hello Barbie. And so we include a number of the tips because I think if we start looking at what we should be asking, right? Is there a default password so the bad guys can get in? Can the parent change the password? Is it only going to communicate with whitelisted servers? So if my concern is that someone will push out an update, right, that will turn the friendly device into something that can talk or listen or do things that it isn't intended, well, it ought not to be communicating with other than the whitelisted servers. Maybe it should only get signed updates so that the bad actor can update it so that a microphone can be turned on remotely or those sorts of things. So in the report, which thanks to the FPF staff and the FOSI staff who did a great job pulling together, we go through a lot of the leading security tips that we hope will be useful for companies of different sizes to make sure that they are doing what they can do. Okay, one last tip. Do I have time for one tip? How am I doing? One tip. Okay, so we talked about how these things have IP addresses, they have MAC addresses, which they are broadcasting, right? So there's a Wi-Fi network here. So if Chip was on, the Wi-Fi network or the technical tools that lots of spaces like this, like airports, like retailers use to count how many phones are in the space or to understand how many people and how they move and navigate through stores. Typical technology today obviously it's useful. We want to know how long the lines are in the airports, and this is the way that this data is collected. But it does mean that your phone and your device, and yes, your toys, if your kids like mine took their favorite toys, with them out. So you want to make sure that it is possible, if you're a manufacturer, to separately turn off the Wi-Fi. A lot of these things, they want to make it simple, right? You call in, I can't get it to work. Well, is the Wi-Fi on? So there often isn't a separate switch for Bluetooth or Wi-Fi because it's intended to be on. Well, give me that switch, maybe hide it so I don't accidentally turn it off, but hide it so I can turn it off. Or go ahead and opt out your device, or maybe the manufacturers might even opt out all their devices at the industry page that allows folks who don't want their phones or other devices to be tracked in public spaces to go ahead and do that. Anyway, we hope you'll take a look at the report. Thanks so much to the FOSI team for being a great partner in pulling together. We think there are lots of useful tips in there, and we're looking forward to the reaction from some of our FTC leaders to what they think. So thanks so much, Sarah, Stephen, thank all of you.
Thank you, Jules, for that excellent presentation. I'm so glad to see that FOSI and FPF teamed up for that very helpful and timely paper. I'm only personally disappointed that, Jules, that didn't include a demonstration of all those toys. So maybe we can do that afterwards, because live demos always go so well and so bland. Next, we are fortunate to have two very special guests with us, two very incredible women. First, I'd like to introduce FTC Commissioner McSweeny. Commissioner McSweeny was sworn in at the Federal Trade Commission in April of 2014 and to a term that expires in September of next year. Although, as I heard at an event earlier this week, let's not remind ourselves of that. Prior to joining the commission, she served as Chief Counsel for Competition Policy and Intergovernmental Relations for the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division. Commissioner McSweeny, in her time at the FTC, has prioritized both protecting kids and improving data security while at the FTC. And as we've been hearing at this conference, the nexus between the two is especially important. She's also been vocal and a leader about the need to protect the ability of white hat hackers to test for vulnerabilities and for IoT companies to prioritize data security in order to enhance consumer trust in their nascent industry. I'm also very pleased to introduce the co-head of Hogan Lovells Privacy and Security Practice, Julie Brill. Prior to this position, she was a longtime public servant, most recently as FTC Commissioner from April 2010 until March of this year. Julie is without question a globally recognized expert on privacy, security, consumer protection, and antitrust. And if you search for her name, you'll often find her described with phrases like top mind and game changer. Thankfully, that's a pretty good description. Thankfully for all of us, she is still a frequent speaker and author on emerging privacy and cybersecurity issues. Julie will moderate this discussion, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions from the audience as well. And just one more thing I forgot to mention, please do tweet while you're at the conference. The hashtag, I believe, is FOSI 2016, but let's keep the conversation online as well as here in the room. So thank you, Julie.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks so much. Hi.
Hi.
I think it was me who said, let's not remind ourselves of when your term is up earlier this week.
In 1 week. So.
It is. So we just heard Jules talk about this wonderful work that FPF and FOSI have done to put together a paper talking about connected toys and COPPA and all of that. At a high level, before we dive into the details, obviously there are incredible benefits to connected toys and to all of these services that are going to be helping kids and children, and also, of course, some privacy and security issues. So tell me, as a commissioner, how do you think about balancing the benefits and the risks, and what do you see as your role in helping that conversation go forward?
Well, first of all, I want to just say thank you so much to FOSI and also to Jules for the very helpful paper that he just presented on this morning, and to you, Julie, for moderating this conversation. It's great to be able to have time to sit down with you and have a discussion again. I am a federal trade commissioner, but I'm also a parent of a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. So these issues are sort of in real time playing out in my family and household. in a way that I suspect is actually an experience that a lot of us in the room share. So on the one hand, I try to think about how do we balance the right approach to protecting kids' security and privacy and giving parents meaningful choices, and in a regulatory and enforcement-based model against also my own experiences as a parent. And so I wanted to call out a few things in what we just heard. One, that I think COPPA can apply, and I think that's a really important takeaway from the paper. I think another important aspect of it is providing parents with meaningful choices in an environment where we aren't necessarily engaging with a screen, and providing them with some sort of information at the point of sale. I think that's a recommendation in the report that is a really meaningful one. Because it's not simply whether you're COPPA compliant, I think, that matters here. I think it also matters generally in whether parents are going to buy this technology, whether they can trust it. And you know, the minute we have a connected toy DDoS attack on, you know, a network or connected home, I think we're going to see very different response to this kind of technology and a lot more sensitivity to it. Let alone, you know, even creepier invasions of privacy of the home. So I think it's really important as a foundational issue in building consumer trust in the technology.
Yeah, in some ways, it's interesting because connected toys that do come under COPPA provide, you know, there's an ability to provide so much more protection than there might be for other connected devices and whatnot. I mean, having verifiable parental consent, COPPA actually has a security requirement in it too. Most people don't talk about that, but it is also part of COPPA. So in many ways, that really raises the bar for these products where that bar doesn't necessarily exist, at least in law, for other connected products. So COPPA compliant connected toys would be terrific, but what else should parents be thinking about, right? So beyond COPPA, which is of course incredibly important, and FOSI and FPF did a fabulous job putting this paper together because this has been under discussion for a very long time. You know, how do COPPA and connected devices interface? But even beyond that, what do you think parents should be thinking about when they're shopping for their toys this holiday season?
As I am right
As
now.
you are,
actually,
yes, yes.
Stopped by the tables outside. I was actually demoing a couple of toys that are on my kids' holiday list. So it was very useful for a number of reasons. Well, so getting beyond the core privacy and security questions, I think there are some larger issues here that get to kind of a broader data ethics, connected, smart toy ethical question, right? We have this in a number of contexts as we think about the ways in which we are connecting every aspect of our lives. First of all, you know, if the technology is truly smart and interactive, I think we need more information and more study about the impact that has on developing minds, and also the extent to which young children have the ability to even understand and differentiate between that kind of technology and what it is and reality. And actually thought that's one of the reasons why calling for more engagement, for engagement at every level of government, but also with researchers and with other government agencies that have an interest here, is actually a really important recommendation that FOSI is making. Because I don't know that we completely understand the impact of this kind of technology on young people. Related to that, and I think this would be more within the FTC jurisdiction, I'm pretty mindful of the ways in which a connected smart toy could be used as a marketing channel directly to children. I would argue that it may be impossible to provide sufficient notice to a child if the connected toy that hasn't been played with in a week pipes up in the toy bin and says, "Oh gee, Jane, can you please pick me up and play with me? And by the way, I have a new dress that you can get if you just ask your butler, and also a new friend that I would really, really like to play with. Why don't we all have a play date?" This is maybe genius for marketing purposes, but you know, I have a 6-year-old. It's going to be a very confusing conversation for that child to have, and I think we have to be really careful if that's the scenario that we are in.
That's an interesting point, to the interface between these connected toys and marketing. That's really interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about security of these devices, because I know that that's something that you have thought deeply about and you've really focused on while you've been a commissioner. You know, connected toys are going to be part of the same ecosystem as all the other connected home devices. We've spoken a lot at the FTC and elsewhere about the threat vectors that each single device would have into that network of devices. But what do you see what is special about connected toys? I mean, is there anything special? Is it the same safety concerns, or are there additional safety, both data protection as well as device protection issues when it comes to connected toys?
Well, I mean, as you know very well from your time at the FTC, within the IoT security space, we have looked very carefully at situations in which cameras are turned on in people's bedrooms and in which live feeds of babies are put on the public internet. So to the extent that we regard the invasion of the home as a very special kind of privacy harm, or the publication of live feeds of our children in the public internet as a very special kind of invasion of private space, I think that's consistent in an area in which toys are definitely very intimately connected in our lives. So I think that's an issue. I think there's an additional set of issues here that are the same really as in the IoT space, but maybe slightly more complicated, because toys are things that our children form relationships with. So for example, in the IoT space right now, we're very concerned about what happens and how do you communicate directly with consumers when you decide to stop supporting a connected product, stop patching it early in its product life cycle. So you brick it sooner than a reasonable consumer might expect it to be support, or you sort of end its security life cycle earlier. And so this is why I thought actually Jules's point about having a Wi-Fi on-off switch may be very important, because imagine you're bricking, I don't want to call out specific toys, but like cute connected toy cat that your kid is in love with, and it's not supported after 2 years. Is the parent at that point going to just take the toy that is the childhood's friend and throw it away, which is what we would probably recommend you do at that point, because you don't want to have insecure things connected to the internet in your home network especially. Or is there going to be a way for the parents to shut off some of that functionality and keep the toy in a relatively dumb state, but a secure state, so kind of air gapping it, if you will. And even if that does happen, I can imagine scenarios where no longer having that relationship in the same way is actually difficult for the child, right? So what is the consumer expectation, and what are they told when they buy the product about how long it will last? And then how do you make the consumer whole, especially if you don't choose to support the product as long as that period of time? So I think those are going to be questions that are really challenging. They're going to be challenging for parents. They're going to be challenging for the manufacturers and the sellers of the products, who are also going to need to find ways to continue to communicate with their consumers, so that if they do have to send patches, those updates are being made, or if they are making a decision about whether to support a product, those consumers are reachable.
So that's a great outline, excuse me, of the responsibility that manufacturers may have in this space. What about policymakers? So I don't want to catastrophize what the 11th Circuit did in the LabMD most recent discussion, where the stay of the consent order was granted. And there was some language in there that really, if the 11th Circuit carries forward with that, could really cut to the heart of some of what the FTC has tried to do, not only in the IoT space, but just generally speaking with respect to data security, when the data involved would result in emotional harm. And I think that's to a certain extent what we've been talking about when it comes
so we're
to
talking
kids.
about non-economic harm,
Exactly.
which is the same thing as turning on cameras in bedrooms and posting live feeds of children in their play space, etc.
Exactly. So what should policymakers do? Again, whether that theory carries forward in a final decision coming out of the 11th Circuit, or just generally speaking, we heard Stephen and Jules talk about, the new administration should put in place a chief safety officer, right, and put in money to this issue so that we can really enhance safety. And then we have the jurisdictional issues. What would be your checklist for what policymakers should be doing in this space?
So first of all, I just want to commend you for the use of the word catastrophize. I don't know.
I said, and not catastrophize. Let's not.
Is that even a word? I didn't know. And I agree. Let's not overreact to the 11th Circuit decision around a stay. I think that we will continue to brief in that case and explain our point of view and why it has been a relatively unanimously held bipartisan point of view on this topic. I think that the FTC's enforcement-based approach has proved to be a relatively good way of going about trying to create kind of an incentive for the marketplace to seriously adopt good privacy and security practices around some of these connected products, even absent regulatory requirement to do so. Although, as you point out, COPPA does have a data security and
most people forget about it, but it does,
which is very important.
Yes, absolutely.
But even if you're in the space of not clearly under COPPA, I think that one would argue that certainly you're under the both state requirements and the general FTC requirement to engage in reasonable security practice, which, as you know, is a security by design practice, just as privacy is a privacy by design practice. And I think that leads to this conversation we're having about safety and ethics and governance. These are also, I think, appropriately process-oriented kinds of responsibilities. So I suspect if we don't get the balance right, there will be much more interest in passing stricter requirements as to what your responsibilities are. But if we can engage in a meaningful conversation around what safety by design is, for example, and how that process works organizationally and what the responsibilities are around it, there's going to be a far more, I think, reasonable answer when questions arise associated with these products. And I think that's the kind of framework that we want to be able to build in this space, both to allow for innovation, but also to make sure that some of the real harms, both to children but also to consumers, are mitigated on the front end, rather than ending up in a situation where we have a really significant problem and then pressure for a much stronger response to it. So I do think a lot of convening, a lot of best practices in this area would be very useful at this point. And I suspect if they don't prove strong enough, then we'll see more interest in a legislative response as well, and perhaps a clarification in some of the areas that are murkier.
So you don't spend time on the dark web yourself personally, but I know that you
what I do.
think. Well, okay, that's true. That's true. What you do with your connected toys at night? Who knows?
I know, right?
So no, but you think a lot about these issues, I know, and you've thought a lot about the fact that, and some people here might be alarmed to hear that actually children's data is some of the most valuable data on the dark web, in part because parents often don't understand or realize until much, much later that kids' data has been used and compromised and all sorts of things have happened with it. So what would you recommend to parents? I mean, we've talked about manufacturers, we talked about policymakers, but what steps can parents take over and above just giving consent and monitoring what, their COPPA rights, as it were? What other steps can parents take to protect their kids, to protect the information about their kids?
I will recommend the Federal Trade Commission table that's right outside the door. We have a lot of really good information there as well. This is actually a really present issue for me as a parent.
Right.
My children's information is out there. It's been exposed not just through actually 3 hacks now. So the other day I was actually just trying to a situation that was very confusing with some of my daughter's identification information, and I was trying to go through a process of trying to put just some kind of alert in the credit reporting process about possible misuse of her identity. This was an incredibly time-consuming process. I only succeeded with one credit reporting agency. The rest were multi-step mail-in forms and things, and phone numbers weren't working properly. And I thought, my goodness, this is I'm a federal trade commissioner. I'm following the advice that we have, and this is a really hard process.
Right.
And in many states, it's not even possible to engage in it because you have no authority to create a credit report, for example, and freeze it in order to try to protect your kid's identity. So we have a really haphazard approach around protecting children's identities. We don't have a unified federal level ability to really give parents the information that they need, especially if their kids' identities are being spoofed in some way that is complicated. So I think this is going to continue to be a really challenging thing for people. I think there are going to be other challenging problems that I hope don't arise, but I suspect will. They will involve, ransomware on toys and things like that. So we have to be mindful of the fact that the security requirement here isn't just some sort of do right by COPPA requirement. It gets really to core trust, adoption, trust in the brand, and I think it's an incredibly important area.
Great. Okay. Yeah, and I think at this point, only 20 states have credit freeze laws that require the credit reporting agencies to allow parents to put a freeze on their child's accounts.
But even then, you
Right.
can easily have pieces and portions of the identity used for fraud in other ways
That's
that
absolutely.
aren't even detected by that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we want to take some questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. Do we have some questions for Terrell? Okay, yeah.
Do you use the microphone? Coming to you.
Carl Zabo with NetChoice, thanks again for coming. This is always a great conference, and it's good to hear from experts on this. Two questions. One, and I don't know if it's addressed in the report because I haven't had a chance to read it because it's hot off the presses. But one of the fundamental questions with respect to the kind of internet-enabled devices, if you're anybody like me, so I've got two kids, most likely my son's toys will be passed off to my daughter. What do we do about verifiable parental consent? Is that duplicative? Do I have to give it a second time? As well as what happens when friends come over and play with these toys? Second question is, we are fortunate that we do have a safety commission designed specifically for consumer products, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. I was wondering, to what extent should they be part of the conversation, and have they been part of the conversation?
These are two really, really good questions. Let me take the first one first, which is, I would say you're going to need to give verifiable consent for each child, but if you're a parent who's familiar already with having consented in the one, then it would probably be relatively easy because you would understand the mechanism, or maybe not, depending. But this other question of the extent to which other children's identifiable information is being collected without their parents' consent is more complicated. And I was getting mic'd up during the part where Jules was talking about it, but I suspect what he said is you may actually, in fact, have COPPA issues if you're collecting other children's identifiable information without their parents' consent. And that this is a thing that, especially if you have a child-directed product as opposed to a product that's more directed at a general audience, we are going to need to think about. It's the same kind of issue that we confront as parents today. I mean, I personally wouldn't post my friends' kids on any social network without their consent. It has happened to me where people have put my kids on social networks and their images and without my consent, and so I talk to them about why I don't like that. And I think this is going to have to be a conversation that parents are also having among themselves. Certainly, it's gonna come up for sure, and I think it's an important area both for parents to be educated about, and then for people to be thinking about how do they handle that information if it's identifiable and therefore COPPA covered.
And in some ways, the ambient data issue, which is really what you're talking about, how do you get permissions for ambient data, guests in the home, kids playing with your friends playing with your kid's toy, permeates the IoT ecosystem. I mean, this isn't just an issue with respect to connected toys. COPPA has an overlay on it because of the verifiable parental consent, but to the extent that manufacturers are and others that are collecting information with respect to IoT devices generally are seeking consent from the users, how do you do that for guests in the home? So this is an issue that I think the manufacturers and others have been thinking deeply about, and clearly some best practices are called for. There's no question about that in this space.
So there was a second question
yes,
here, which was the role of the
CPSC.
Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Yes.
I think it's a great question. I haven't personally talked to them about it. The FTC has been handling privacy and data security cases for about 25 years, and we've been substantially increasing our technical expertise in order to handle these kinds of cases. So we think we understand a lot about this technology. I suspect the Consumer Product Safety Commission is probably going to need to get smart on it as well. I think it would also be incredibly helpful, and there's some efforts afoot in the broader IoT space to really generate some sort of independent testing and labeling capabilities so that I, as a consumer, could quickly look at a label and understand the privacy and security practice around a device. So there's a project right now that's funded by DARPA that's looking at software and IoT and coming up with a kind of like energy saver type of label for what the security practices are around it, the Cyber Independent Security Testing Lab or something like that. And that's a step in this direction, but I suspect we are going to need something more, especially geared towards toys, so that there's a quick and easy way for people to be in the big box store looking at something or looking at it online and seeing what it's doing and whether it comports with whatever their family policies are around privacy and security.
Well, will you please join me in thanking Terrell for this incredibly great conversation? So thank you.
Thank you.
I told you guys we were going to have some good conversations today, didn't I? Thank you so much to both of you for having that. And apparently on the screen earlier when I was talking, it got a little carried away about how well the Google Home and Amazon Echo device got along. I actually am with Google, not with Amazon. But it's good to know that we get along in person just as much as our devices do. I also want to take a chair prerogative and mention the FOSI ID theft research that was issued about 3 years ago, I guess, and I think that that's timely to go back and look in light of the discussion that we just heard from former Commissioner Brill and Commissioner McSweeny. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Katherine Russell, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues. Ambassador Russell leads the State Department's efforts to advance gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls around the world, a very important and incredibly timely issue. In this role, she focuses on addressing gender-based violence, promoting women's full participation in society, investing in adolescent girls, and integrating women's issues into U.S. foreign policy. Before that, she brings a legacy of public service and leadership that spans the government. So we're very lucky to have Ambassador Russell, so please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Doing a little dance there. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to be here, not least of which because this is the most beautiful space in town, and it's a perfect day. And it was also really nice for me to hear Terrell speak because she and I are old friends and colleagues. We both worked for, he was then Senator Biden on the Hill many years ago, so it's great to see her in this space and doing such amazing work. So I'm very happy to be here. This is an issue. These violence issues are things that particularly in the online space, that the more I learn about, the more concerned I get. And it's funny, as I was sitting here listening to the discussion before, that's not an area I'd even thought about. And I have children, so now I'm going to have to go home and like rethink. It's kind of disturbing to me. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I guess I would say this, we obviously are in a moment of transition in our government. And so I think this conference is a really important opportunity for us to see where we stand and find ways to do more and to try to do better and to continue to have this conversation and push this dialogue along. I'm interested in this issue from two perspectives, which you can easily guess given my title. One is in the work that we do to support women and girls around the world, and also just in the sort of the violence that we see that women are facing in many places. When you think about how the internet can change people's lives, it's clear that this work is critical. The internet is a place where we can, find our friends, read history books, explore other cultures. We can start new businesses. We can do all sorts of positive things. And in my work, I've seen how powerful the internet, particularly social media, can be when it comes to making progress on key human rights issues like women's rights. In the past year, however, we have seen countless online conversations about gender-based violence, and they've gone viral. It's been really interesting to see that process. In the Ukraine and Russia, thousands of women started to use a hashtag called I'm Not Afraid to Say, which was an opportunity for them to share their personal experiences with sexual assault. In China, individual stories of women who experienced abuse at the hands of intimate partners have gone viral on something called Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter. And in the United States, women have shared their stories under any number of hashtags, and often we would then see those stories picked up by mainstream media and see some of the stories in the New York Times and other sources. When you consider that 1 in 3 women will experience some form of violence in her lifetime around the world, it's no surprise that there are a lot of stories to share and a lot of women who want to share those stories. But the stigma around sexual assault is almost as universal as the violence itself, and that's where online and digital spaces have made a real difference. They've given survivors connection and community and inspired national conversations on a historically incredibly difficult issue to talk about. We can hope that these stories will change minds, change harmful gender stereotypes, and ultimately change these devastating statistics that we see about gender-based violence around the world. For this and for many other reasons, the internet should be a tool that everyone can use and a place where everyone can go and feel safe doing it. But as we know, that is far from a reality today. For every triumphant story about how the internet helps perpetuate good, there's a story about how it helps perpetuate violence, harassment, and inequality. Just this week, I saw a report that 47% of Americans have experienced some form of harassment online. What's interesting is that while both men and women are harassed online, the nature of the harassment is different for women. The abuse experienced by women, especially young women, is more likely to have a severe negative impact on their lives offline. Men report being called names or being embarrassed, while women report being stalked or sexually harassed or threatened with rape online. And these instances don't happen in a vacuum. When a woman running for office finds a photo of herself online, photoshopped into a sexually explicit scene, that has an impact on women's ability to participate in democracy. It's one of the issues that we work on around the world is trying to encourage more women into the political space. That kind of intimidation is really detrimental to the work that we're doing. When a woman posts an opinion or a joke online and receives threats of rape in return, that has an impact on freedom of expression. When the reputation of a business is wrongly attacked on YouTube or on Yelp simply because it's owned by a woman, which was so surprising to me when I saw the data on that, that has an impact on women's economic opportunity. Again, something that we're working on aggressively around the world. That impact means that gender-based violence online matters to all of us. It matters to people who care about strong political systems and freedom of expression, to people who care about the economy and entrepreneurship, to people who care about funny jokes and even TV shows, and to people who want their children to use the internet without fearing for their safety. It matters from a foreign policy perspective as well. Gender-based violence is one of the key issues that I've worked on even before I got to the State Department, but certainly while at the State Department, because we've seen how it holds back women and girls from getting an education, from earning an income, from participating in the political process, and ultimately from contributing in a meaningful way to their societies. And that holds all of us back from reaching our shared goals of peace, prosperity, and security around the world. So addressing these forms of violence, wherever they occur, is an important U.S. foreign policy priority. The good news is together there are things we can do. I'd like to offer three things that we've been thinking about, ways that government, civil society organizations, and the private sector can work together to address the issue of gender-based violence online. First, we have to acknowledge that it is a problem that needs to be solved. Sometimes people look at these issues and they say, well, it's inevitable, or there's just nothing we can do about it. The National Democratic Institute, which does support for political work around the world and does really important work trying to promote democracy, recently launched a campaign called It's Not the Cost, because they kept hearing people say over and over again that for women running for office around the world, violence online was simply the cost of being a part of the political system. And they said that's not okay. We can't just accept that. Violence is not the price women should have to pay, and it's not the price democracy should have to pay either. Women's voices and experiences are too critical to public discourse. So we need more researchers, we need more journalists, we need more advocacy organizations to follow in the footsteps of the important work that the Family Online Safety Institute is doing, to acknowledge that this is a problem that we all care about, and to put a gender lens on their work that they're doing. Second, we need to break down the barriers that keep women from thriving in the technology sector, and these barriers are real. There are many reasons that we need more women and girls pursuing science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM fields. And gender-based violence on the internet is really high on that list. We need women serving as CEOs, board members, engineers, product designers, customer service representatives. That way, when products are designed, when new features are tested, when issues come up, women are at the table and they're bringing their perspectives and their experiences to bear. By the way, this is more than a pipeline problem, although it certainly is a pipeline problem. Institutions need to address the systemic discrimination that hold women back from succeeding in STEM fields. There is a lot of discussion about this, a lot of emerging research on it, but it's a critically important area. Finally, we need institutions to take action at an institutional level. I know how hard it can be, believe me. This is the job I do every day, to change the way an institution behaves. For the past 3 years, I've been trying to change the way the State Department looks at issues of women and girls, and trying to make sure that those are included more fully in our plans, our policies, our programs. It's certainly not an easy task, and I appreciate that. But by and large, I think people understand that these issues matter, and that U.S. foreign policy is stronger and more successful when, as the President said, it includes the voices and experiences of women and girls. From my perspective, that's where we stand on this issue. We need to articulate exactly what the problem is and the ways we can work together at every level of leadership to solve it. And that's the challenge we face today. We need everyone, from experts and entrepreneurs to CEOs to survivors to developers to rights defenders to journalists and policymakers, to come together and really try to find solutions that work. There's no question in my mind that the United States should continue to be a leader in this effort. We have experience based on the long work that we've done on the Violence Against Women Act here in the United States. We have the moral standing, and this is something that I see everywhere I go. People look to the United States as a champion of democracy and free speech and human rights, and that role that the United States plays is unmatched by any other country in the world, and that needs to continue. And we have the unique role of being a country where the world's largest tech companies are based. So our responsibility could not be more clear, but the clock is definitely ticking. Technology moves so quickly. You all know that better than anybody, and it has a way of getting ahead of policy. And the longer that happens, the harder it becomes to figure out what frameworks are needed to make these spaces accessible to everybody. I'd like to end with just a reminder of what's at stake, and this is from my world on the international side. There's a woman named Kandil Baloch, who was a Pakistani woman. These people referred to her as the Kim Kardashian of Pakistan. She was very controversial online. She became famous in Pakistan for her selfies and her cultural commentary, and she did a lot of important commentary on women and women's rights. Some people dismissed her, while others really felt that she stood as a symbol of women's rights in Pakistan. But she was killed by members of her family, all because her online presence was viewed as a dishonor to her family. And so for her, the cost of being online and for speaking her mind was her life. Violence should not be the price that women pay to be online. But it's up to us to ensure that freedom to say what you think, to be online, are not freedoms for some, but freedoms for all. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Beseech you to keep these issues about women and violence at the top of mind as you think about the policies. And I really appreciate everything that's happening here. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that, Ambassador, and for your extraordinarily important work, and for us to continue to be an example to the rest of the world. Let's hope that can continue. Right, and in a way, this is a perfect segue to our next speaker. We have a very, very dear friend of ours here at FOSI who is going to come to introduce her latest research. And any of you who's been to a FOSI conference before knows that we really emphasize the research because we want to be evidence-based approach in everything that we do. She is a senior research scientist at the AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research and a researcher at the Data and Society Research Institute. Many of you will remember her for her 16 years, is it really 16 years? At the Pew Research Center, where she undertook groundbreaking studies on teens, technology, and this ever-changing landscape. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Lenhart.
All right, hello. So we're gonna be very cool with our technology today. So if I have slides that I'll be presenting, because I have a lot of data and I think that's generally an easier way for us to talk through, but they're not gonna display on the screen. So if you wanna look at the slides, you'll need to pull it up on the app. So you can actually look at your phone without guilt during my presentation. So let's take this opportunity. So today I'm gonna be talking about the research I released last Monday on online harassment, digital abuse, and cyberstalking in America today. And it's actually the 47% statistic that the ambassador mentioned is in fact from that report. And so page forward to the first slide, and you can see that in fact 47% of online Americans ages 15 and older have experienced at least one type of online harassment. And in this study, and I should back up for a second and say this study was a nationally representative piece of research. It was done on cell phones and landlines with 3,002 Americans. And we specifically included adolescents, which if any of you know research know that sort of ups the difficulty level of the research process sort of exponentially, but we included 15, 16, and 17-year-olds in the research, partly because of the work I'd done before that had shown that there is some sort of relationship and certainly abuse and experiences with harassment that teens are experiencing. So this study, the data that I'm presenting today is all from that study. And as I said, 47% of online Americans 15 and older have experienced at least one type of online harassment. And in our study, we actually asked about 20 different types of online harassment, 20 different particular experiences. And we can go through some of them, and you'll see some of them in my slides if you're looking at them. But it turns out that there are some really important differences with different groups when we're looking at online harassment. And so the first main difference, which I think is actually really quite important, and one which is a thread that we'll see throughout almost all the data that I'll talk about today, is that younger people 15 to 29, anybody under 30, are essentially much more likely to experience online harassment, to witness online harassment, and to experience a lot of the negative repercussions from that harassment. And in fact, if you see on the slide that you can see internet users 15 to 29 are more likely to experience a couple of different types of harassment. And so we actually had so many different types of harassment that we asked about that we put them into 3 categories. So the first type is, we call it direct harassment. This is more of our kind of catch-all grouping. It includes things like being called offensive names, having somebody try to embarrass you online, so potentially relatively mild depending on the context. And then goes on to having someone encouraging others to harass you, which is sometimes known as brigading. Being physically threatened online, being sexually harassed online, being harassed through impersonation, being cyberstalked, which in our definition involves being contacted online repeatedly in a way that makes you feel afraid for your safety. We also have a category which we call invasion of privacy. This is another mode that we see of online harassment where somebody actually accesses information about you and potentially reveals it in a way that compromises your safety and has other impacts on you personally or professionally or financially. This can include things like just simply monitoring your online or phone activity so the person knows where you are and what you're doing. Having somebody read your texts or emails without permission. Having someone misuse content of yours that you've posted on social media. Having your password stolen or coerced from you, potentially by perhaps a romantic partner or by someone else. And literally just being monitored, having somebody use GPS or other tracking software to find where you are in space, whether that's because they're enabling something, you've enabled something on your various social media devices, whether somebody has actually put a tracking device on you, which certainly happens, or whether somebody is using your mobile phone in certain ways to track you. So as I said, it turns out that younger users, ages 15 to 29, are much more likely to experience many kinds of direct harassment and types of invasion of privacy type harassment than older adults. And the real takeaway for me from this finding is that what we see on the internet is really different depending on how old you are. Your kinds of experiences online are really different depending on how old you are. If you are older and you think, you know what, I don't think this is really a big deal, I don't see a lot of it in my networks, that's because you don't see, there's less of it potentially in your networks if you are 30 and older than if you are a young adult. And so I think we do need to be thinking about what that means in terms of the kinds of experiences and what people see and what they experience in these online spaces for our young people today. The next major finding of this report, which I think is really quite fascinating but requires us to kind of dig deeper into the numbers, is that men and women are actually equally likely to have experienced at least one type of harassment. But when we go a little deeper, we see that the kinds of harassment that men and women experience are very, very different. That they're more likely to experience, and their experiences of that harassment are quite different. Their perceptions of that harassment are quite different. So it turns out men are more likely to experience the direct harassment that we talked about, being called offensive names, having somebody try to embarrass you online, being physically threatened online. Men are also more likely to experience the third type of harassment, which is denial of access. And these are really technical attacks. These are where somebody does a DDoS attack on you, where somebody overwhelms your instant messenger or your messaging systems or services by sending you an overwhelming number of messages so that you literally cannot use the platform. And there's a number of other ones, but denial of access is kind of our third type of online harassment. And that's, for men are more likely to experience these denial of service attack types of harassment online. Women are more likely to experience what I would describe as a longer duration, potentially more severe, and with types of harassment with sort of greater life repercussions. Women are more likely to be sexually harassed. They're more likely to have rumors spread about them online, to be harassed over a long period of time, to be stalked online, and to have someone try to harm them in person after being harassed in an online space. Women are also more likely to have sensitive personal information exposed in a way that harms them personally, professionally, or financially. And they're also more likely to have information posted to social media that makes you uncomfortable. So the differences that we see between men and women are really in the nature and the types of the kinds of harassment that they experience. It also turns out that when you combine these two factors, it's really young women in America who are really bearing the brunt of this online harassment. So women ages 15 to 29 are more likely to experience than younger men, and older women being sexually harassed, having someone try to harm them in person after being harassed online, being harassed over a long period of time, being stalked, and having their sensitive information exposed. And I think we need to really think about, and we're going to talk a little bit more about repercussions from that, what choices women are making and what kinds of actions women are taking in response to this. The other information that I haven't actually included in my slides today, partly for time, but which I want to make sure we all acknowledge, is that the other big theme throughout this data is that lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals are much more likely to experience and to witness and to have all of the negative repercussions that we'll talk about from online harassment. It's stark, it's shocking. I definitely suggest that you look at the data in the report, particularly if, I think particularly if these are populations you work directly with, but even if they aren't. aren't. So that's another thread and theme that I have not included in the slides today, but which I want to make sure we mention. So every time you hear me say young people, young women, you should also be thinking lesbian, gay, and bisexual, because that information essentially is a sidecar and very much parallels those other findings. And as I said, so we've talked about that young women and young people are more likely, and lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals are more likely to experience all of these types of harassment. But it turns out their experiences of that harassment are very different. So moving on to the next slide, women are more likely than men to say that they were made angry, worried, or scared because of the abuse that they experienced. In particular, it's particularly scared. About 32% of women who had experienced some kind of harassment said they felt scared because of it. Only about 11% of men who had also experienced harassment said the same thing. So really, partly I think we see that the types of harassment that women are experiencing is really quite different. But also their literal experiences of the harassment are different. And the same thing continues when we actually look at whether or not those who've experienced behaviors that we as researchers think are online harassment actually believe that that's what they're experiencing, right? So one of the things that happened in this study is we did a bunch of pretests, and in the pretests we learned, partly because of how we had initially designed the survey, that a lot of people don't actually think that some of these behaviors that we're talking about constitute harassment. And so we would hear on these interviews, people be like, well, no, it was just a joke. I don't know what you're talking about. I can't answer this question. And so I think that's actually a really important point. And we actually see this in the data to a certain extent, because what we ended up doing is going in and adding a question, which is, do you feel that what you experienced was online harassment or abuse? And it turns out not everybody thinks that, but the differences are really different between men and women. So men are just less likely to believe that what they experienced in this online harassment moment was harassment or abuse. Now again, part of it is that we see what they actually are more likely to experience are different, and potentially, depending on the context, more mild than what women are more likely to experience. But nevertheless, I think we have this sense also that literally how people experience the same thing really is quite different depending on who you are, where you are, who are you in the world? What is your experience of power in life, right? Do you feel that you're a powerful person? Are you somebody who generally is able to do the things that you want? Or are you worried about your safety? Are you worried about being subject to people more powerful than you? And I think we see these dynamics playing out in this harassment, in these harassment data. Moving on to the next slide, I think it's also really important for us to talk about seeing it, right? So it's not just that about half of Americans experience online harassment, it's that nearly 3/4 actually witness it. They see it happening to someone else, right? And this, it turns out, actually has implications in some of the outcomes, because when you see harassment, you are actually more likely to engage in some of the behaviors that we'll talk about at the end around not putting your voice, not sharing your thoughts online. When we look at who witnesses harassment, again, it's the same story that we've seen before. It's much more likely to be young people, lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals. Also, young women in particular. But also, we see Black internet users, and to a lesser extent, Hispanic internet users are also more likely to see certain types of online harassment than white users. We don't actually see that in other parts of the data. Some of that may be because even with the large sample size that we had, the sample size is actually still quite small when it comes to people of color in our study, and so it may be that sample size isn't large enough to be seeing some of these differences in other places. But I really want to get onto what I think is in some ways the most important finding of the study, which is that almost 1/4 of people in America, regardless of whether or not they have seen harassment, regardless of whether or not they have experienced harassment, say that they have not posted something online out of fear of being harassed because of what they posted. Turns out that if you have experienced harassment, you are substantially more likely to say that. Turns out if you're a woman, you're substantially more likely to say that. If you're a young woman, you're substantially more likely to say that. It turns out if you've even witnessed harassment, you're more likely to say that you have self-censored yourself, you have silenced yourself out of concerns of harassment. And I think this comes back to what the ambassador was saying about our concerns about people simply not even adding their voices into the broader national, international conversation about important issues because they're afraid of being attacked. They're afraid of what might come forward. Now, I think it's perfectly fair to say, like, hey, maybe people are thinking, like, maybe I shouldn't post that racist meme and because people are going to harass me, which is entirely true. And that's certainly maybe something of what we're picking up here. But I think if you back up and you look at the demographics of the people who are saying this and the kinds of experiences that they have, I think it's clear to me that what we're actually seeing is a suppression of voice based on people who have experienced or seen other people like them experience online harassment. So I also want to talk a little bit about the kinds of strategies that people who've experienced harassment use to protect themselves, right? So we know there's a bunch of harms that come from harassment. I would actually, again, commend you to look at the report. We go into detail about some of the kinds of experiences and things that happen to people who are victimized by online harassment. But I want to talk about things that are a little bit more empowering, which is what do victims do? So what steps do they take to try to protect themselves from this? Because victims aren't passive, right? They are survivors in many cases. They are taking steps to try to protect themselves. And 65% of victims have tried to do something to protect themselves. About 43% have changed their contact information, whether that's changing their email address, creating new social media profiles, changing their telephone number, in some cases even moving or changing their addresses. About a third have asked for help, and in this category we include things like asking friends or family for help, getting a restraining order or a protection order against your harasser, and also getting help from a domestic violence center, hotline, or organization. About 27% reported the content about themselves, flagged some kind of content that was posted that they objected to. So, proactively engaging with trying to remove the content that was problematic. And about another quarter disconnected from networks or devices. So said, you know what, I'm done. I gotta stop using social media. I am going to stop going online, and I'm gonna stop using my cell phone. Again, cell phone use, it's only about 4% of victims who said they did that, but about 20% said that they stopped using social media, and about 13% said they stopped going online. And so I want to talk a little, I think we need to think through some of the implications of these, right? So on one level, this is empowering because victims can take charge of their lives and say, you know what, we've got these things that I can do to kind of help myself and protect myself. But if we think about the further implications of this, many of these things are taking these people away from their networks of support, places where they do business, the places where they can engage, where they can have conversation, where they can connect with their friends and family. So there's a lot of different reasons why even these actions that you're taking to protect yourself are actually really detrimental to the people who experience this. They isolate them, it disconnects them from people who could support them and from opportunities to sort of share their thoughts and experiences. I want to end on a positive note. The one little glimmer of hope in the report is that we asked people who had witnessed harassment whether they had taken one of three actions to respond to that harassing experience that they witnessed. And it turns out about 63% of online Americans who've witnessed harassment have done at least one of three things. Most of them said something to the person who was targeted, hopefully something supportive. We don't know exactly what. Another 40% actually said something to the person or people who were perpetrating the harassment. And about 38% reported or flagged this behavior through the online platforms that they witnessed it in. Now, we don't know, there's a lot of kind of context around these things. Many people don't know necessarily. You see something, you witness something, and you're not that close to the people involved. You don't really know the context. There's a lot of reasons why it may be difficult to do some of these things, but I think witnesses in general should be applauded for being the bystanders that this data suggests that they are. And with that, I will say thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions if there's time. If there's not time, then on we go. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for that, Amanda. Sorry to have to pull you because so many questions in my mind from the data that you've just presented to us. And apologies for many of you, the slides weren't available at the beginning of her talk. They are very much there now. But you are so good at explaining the figures that people were tweeting out blind, basically. They were tweeting what you were saying. So thank you for that. So it is a particular pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker. And there's a personal connection because for a number of years towards the tail end of the 90s, my family lived up in Lexington, Massachusetts. In fact, my second daughter, Emily, was born in Lexington. Well, actually in Stoneham Hospital, which is no longer. It's across the street from the Stoneham Zoo, which at 3 in the morning in a snowstorm, I actually pulled into the parking lot of the Stoneham Zoo. My wife said, no, I'm not giving birth here. Anyway, very special place in my heart. And Lexington just happens to be in the 5th District of Massachusetts, where our next speaker is from. Her career in public service is driven by her commitment to helping children and families succeed. She is a vocal advocate for ending wage discrimination, protecting women's health care, access to affordable, high-quality child care, paid family leave, safer schools, and other reforms to address the challenges women and families face. And we are absolutely delighted to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Katherine Clark.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be with you, and thank you, Stephen. And the Stoneham Zoo is also in MA5, so we are delighted you ended up at the right destination, and even more delighted at the work that you're doing here at the Institute. And for all of you for being here, and for the panel that's coming, and thank you, Amanda, for your incredible research. So needed. And we will be working with you as we go forward with our projects as well. And as all of you know, addressing online abuse is so critical in this economy where most jobs require an online presence. And online abuse can not only have a chilling effect on speech, but can impact personal finances, feelings of safety, and participation in that online economy. I'd like to talk to you briefly about the work that we've been doing in Congress, and I hope the partnership with each of you as we move into the next session. This was not an issue that when I ran for Congress in a special election in 2013 that I ran on or even thought much about, except that as a woman in politics, I certainly was no stranger to the phenomenon of online abuse. But I became involved with this issue when I learned of a constituent named Brianna Wu, who is a game developer, a video game developer, who lives in my district in Arlington. She contacted us because she had been subjected to countless threats of rape, dismemberment, murder. They had her personal address was released, detailed times of day, her husband's work schedule, and the type of weapons, including videos of those weapons, that would be used to commit the murder of Brianna and her family. And we started meeting with Brianna, with other victims of online abuse, the criminal justice community, anti-violence advocates, experts in the field of cybercrimes, and nonprofit groups that were fighting online abuse to see where we could help. And what we learned is very much what Amanda has crystallized today, that millions of women and girls are online right now, navigating their personal and professional lives, and they are the disproportionate target of the very worst kind of abuse, threats of sexual assault, murder, sextortion, non-consensual pornography, and the list goes on. The same holds true for people of color and members of the LGBTQ community. And we learned that whether it's developers or law enforcement or lawmakers, little has been done to prevent and stop online abuse or to help victims. And what we're hearing from advocates and victims of abuse, that too often, instead of taking proactive measures to prevent and stop abuse, social media platforms have put the onus on the victim to resolve the abuse. Local police, we have found, extremely well-intentioned, but have almost no training or resources for the victims that they seek help. The most common response we heard from our local law enforcement was, "What is Twitter?" And it goes from there. It's not their fault. This is not what they've been trained to deal with, but we have to address this if we're going to really come up with solutions. We also learned that federal laws have not kept up to date with cyber crimes like swatting, sextortion, or non-consensual pornography. And even in cases where it is against federal law to use the internet to cause fear of death or harm, these crimes are rarely investigated or prosecuted. And when they do end up in our criminal justice system, the lack of prioritization and understanding of these issues really benefit the perpetrator and not the victim. Within the last 18 months, we were working with a victim of Gamergate and also of a very methodical ex-boyfriend who went after someone that many of you may have heard of named Zoe Quinn. And her boyfriend was in Boston, in Massachusetts, and when she went before a Massachusetts Superior Court judge, after documenting years of this very methodically done ruining of her reputation, was told to simply get offline. And unfortunately, that is something that we still see routinely in our court systems and from law enforcement. So for Brianna and the many, many other victims who have been failed by this system, this has meant taking drastic and life-altering decisions. We've seen women leave their homes, hire private security, forfeit work opportunities, move to different states, sometimes across the country. We've seen young women and girls opting out of career paths, especially journalism and politics. As we look for solutions, it's important that we see how online abuse is so tied to our 21st century economy and so tied to equality and justice and freedom of speech. What we've been working on is really trying to form a partnership with so many of you and trying to address these systematic problems on multiple fronts. And I hope that you will work with us on some of the solutions that we have proposed in Congress. Thanks to the many brave voices that have come forward and been willing to tell their stories, put themselves in harm's way again, we have been able to make sure that our leaders in Washington have a better understanding of this issue. We want to make sure that our laws empower the Department of Justice and our local law enforcement with the training and resources and guidance they need to help victims of online abuse and to stop those who perpetuate these crimes. We also want to make sure that our laws are keeping pace with the prevalence and type of cyber crimes we're seeing. From addressing severe online threats to combating crimes like swatting and sextortion, I've introduced several bills that will prioritize the investigation and prosecution with the Department of Justice, as well as close the gaps in the federal code to ensure protections for victims. I'm happy to say that since we've started our work with advocates and partners, we've got the backing of the House of Representatives for 2 years in a row to issue instructions to DOJ to increase the prosecution and investigation of severe online threats. And we cannot let that work go backwards in a new administration. We have to keep pressing forward on that. We have also put forth a bill that would give local communities and law enforcement training and resources so that they can have the tools that they need to offer help locally. And my staff and I have had many meetings, some positive, most not, with the FBI, trying to get them to realize the importance of these prosecutions. We've been working with developers, from startups to very established brands, we have had an open dialogue with tech and media developers, and we want to be helpful in creating the lines of communication. But we need to do a better job with our tech community. We are firmly committed that if you are designing social media platforms or other types of high-tech products and programs, you have to have diversity in the room. Diversity starts with design. And if we don't have that, we are never going to be able to really look at how we get to the root of this problem when it comes to abuse through certain platforms. If we don't have diversity in the room, if we will continue to see the disparities in how we navigate and participate in digital spaces. We have been very grateful that decision makers, especially in Silicon Valley, are taking bigger proactive steps, and we applaud that and we continue to work with them. But we need to continue our work with some of the incredible nonprofit groups that we have worked with, Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and the Anti-Defamation League that have been true partners in helping us create this work. I would like to see all these bills pass in the next Congress, but I have to tell you that it has been a challenge. Often when we put together packets on an anti-swatting bill that I introduced, which pretty swiftly brought a swatting incident at my own home, which, you know, I had the distinct advantage of understanding what swatting was and what was probably going on. But there was that moment of terror when I stepped out not knowing what was happening and why all these lights were out, and I stepped out and the street was blocked, and I thought something awful was happening in our neighborhood. And then I saw the long guns on my lawn, and I realized that, you know, something might be about to happen that is really critical to my family. And there was just that moment where I just was filled with fear about what was happening and what might be starting to happen. But then the police officer approached me and said, "We got an anonymous call of a shooter." And I'm probably one of the few people who's like, "Oh, I know what this is." But if you didn't know, and when I go around and talk to members about signing on to the swatting bill and give them clips that my Cracker Jack staff has prepared from their districts of swatting incidents, they have no idea what I'm talking about. People don't understand what swatting is, what doxing is, all these terms that we unfortunately have become familiar with. We need to make sure they understand the prevalence in their own district and how this relates to really security for everybody in this country. No part of the country is immune, and no particular constituent of any political ideology is immune either. We need your partnership. We need this campaign to be in the halls of Congress as well. We need people to clearly understand the free speech that is at risk, and the feeling of security and economic security as well that we put in jeopardy every day. I invite you to go to our website. It's Katherine Clark with no E, and you can see detailed descriptions of our bills. It is the stories of what is happening to victims, what is happening to certain professions, what is happening to free speech and security. That is how, when we have those stories, the stories you know, either personally or from people you've worked with or from research that you're doing, that is how we change the laws in Congress, and we change the minds, and we change the tide on this abuse and online stalking. I am proud to be in partnership with you. I thank you for your incredible work that is represented in this room, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for that, Congresswoman. Such extraordinarily important work. Vital, challenging, and I know you guys have had a pretty challenging morning so far, so I want to lift the mood a little bit. I'm going to invite you all to just stand up. It's not hard. Come on. We did it in kindergarten. And I'm going to invite you to turn and introduce yourself to someone you haven't met yet for a couple of minutes while we set the stage. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll be here all day, yeah.
Oh, great. So
Yeah, I'll be up here watching your thing. Good luck.
I mean, thank you. I think
Yeah.
after all that, I'm going to need it.
In about 2 minutes. Last one. Last one. Good to see you. Thanks so much for doing this. Oh, that worked. We used to do that in kindergarten too. If you could all please take your seats. Maybe with your new friends, it's up to you. But we'd really like to get restarted. Thank you so much. I don't know if you noticed, but when Representative Clark was speaking, we revealed the Capitol and shut off behind us here. So that was very cleverly done. Thank you, Museum, for doing that. Also, while I have your attention, on your tables are some handouts. One for our Good Digital Parenting program. This is the remarkable How to Be a Good Digital Parent PowerPoint slides and FAQs and everything you ever needed to do to give an online safety talk at your school, your church, your community center, and it is all for free thanks to Facebook, Google, and ESRB. So please download it. Do something positive back in your community after what you've heard today. The other is GRID, the Global Resource and Information Directory. This is a unique resource that tells you everything you ever wanted to know about online safety, searchable by country, and in some cases by state and province. It was funded by UNICEF. I want to acknowledge Anjan Bose. Anjan, you want to say hi? Thank you, Anjan. Who's come down from New York to be with us today. And we are extremely proud of how this has turned out and the resource that it makes available, particularly for parts of the world that are moving into this space perhaps for the first time. So anyway, look what's happened since I got up here. I am very, very pleased to introduce our moderator for this panel, a longtime friend and collaborator, Gene Polizinski. He is the Chief Operating Officer of the Museum Institute, which includes the Religious Freedom Center, the First Amendment Center, and the Museum ED, and this place, let's just face it. So Gene's the man. Thank you for this gorgeous building. Thank you for the beautiful weather as well.
Glad to help out there.
Anytime. Gene is one of the founding editors of USA Today. He oversees all the programs of the Museum Institute and is also a longtime proponent of diversity in journalism as an essential element of a free press. And I can't think of a more timely time to be having this discussion than now. So Gene, please take it over.
Thank you so much, Steve. Well, let me add the welcomes I hope you've already had to being here at the museum and to FOSI and the work that goes on around these annual meetings and has gone on for some time. Yeah, I think one of the posits that I would propose right from the start is that this is an issue, while it may be in our brains and forebrains because of the very disruptive experiences that we've all seen, regardless of ideology, during this campaign, and the larger question is really what has come before, what will come after, and while it may bring these issues to fore for the moment, we have a chance, and you have a chance to talk about and to work on these issues that are rooted in much broader kinds of concerns, much more long term. So I've been trying to convey that message at a number of sessions lately because we're so focused right now on what's been happening the last few months. But these, as you all are here and know, larger concerns. Joined on the podium today by Jacqueline Boucher, who is Chief Online Safety Officer at Microsoft, Dr. Megan Moreno, who is from the University of Washington and also works with the Seattle Children's Research Institute, Patricia Cortez, Head of Global Safety Outreach for Twitter, and Tony Gonsalves, who is Senior Vice President for Strategy and Business Development at AT&T. And I love a good diversity of perspectives here. But in discussing our format, because we recognize that unlike a typical audience, many of you, if not all of you, are experts in your own ways to bring things here. We'll try to move to your questions rather quickly, but we thought it was good to hear from each of the panel members here, both for you to get a sense of perspective, for them to emphasize the things that they're seeing as maybe in the front of their work. So, Ms. Boucher, if I may begin with you and talk about Microsoft's approach to this whole issue of hate speech and from the First Amendment guy's standpoint, this explosion of an exchange of ideas, often I think in ways that when the internet was new, we didn't totally envision. So can you talk for a moment about what Microsoft is doing and your concerns at the moment?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. I wanted to start by saying what Microsoft's approach is generally to online safety. We have sort of a four-part approach that we talk about. We focus on internal governance, so making sure that the appropriate policies and standards and procedures are in place for us to govern these issues on our services. We also focus on technology. Obviously, we're a technology company, so innovation and investments. We want to make sure that the appropriate capabilities and features and functionality are in our products from the get-go so that we're seeing family safety, individual safety protections in the products at the outset. We also engage in partnerships and outreach, and then finally educational initiatives, informal educational initiatives, as well as public awareness raising. So when it came to hate speech, we have always had a long-standing prohibition on Microsoft services where we allow for user-generated content. We want to make sure that we are not, in fact, allowing hate speech. And that is articulated in our code of conduct. We have a 10-point code of conduct. It's basically a list of thou shall nots. And point number 7 is communicating hate speech, among other things. That's listed as one example. We don't want people putting themselves at risk, the services at risk, or others at risk. So we enumerate that clearly. What we did come out with just a couple of months ago at the end of August was some new reporting resources to make it easier for people to report hate speech to us when they see it on our hosted consumer services. So basically we have a dedicated web reporting form now that if you see something that looks like hate speech, you don't have to say or know exactly how we're defining it or how others may define it, but you can report that to us, we will address it, and we will take it down and block it if necessary. We don't always get things right. Not everyone does. This is new territory for everyone. So we've also instituted yet another new form where you can ask for your content to be reconsidered for reinstatement. So if you feel that we've rejected something or taken something down in error, we want you to be able to report that to us so we can aim to correct it. And we do that across all of our services for all types of content. So it's not just if you think we removed hate speech in error. It would be anything that we potentially removed in error. And that form is also listed in that blog post. You could find that on Microsoft on the issues. If you just do Microsoft on the issues hate speech, a search on Bing or other search engines. And,
may exist somewhere
that may
out there.
exist. And just do that search and you'll see the two new forms. And I'll talk about some other things as well, but we could start with that.
Well, one of the things that I was struck by is that there's always this inherent tension. The First Amendment, which does not apply to a private company, by the way, applies to the government. The First Amendment protects hate speech to a place where it generates conduct. We don't restrain the ideas. And it's a very difficult task, I would think, I've read the guidelines. I think and with this response on why it shouldn't be taken down, you, I think, addressed some concerns with that. What's the parsing really of what considered hate speech? Is it speech that's going to lead to conduct? Is it, in the end of developing your approach?
We're basically looking at content that would promote hate based on what are largely a series of immutable characteristics, whether it be hate, age or disability or gender or national ethnic origin, race, religion, etc. And I will say that we don't have the kind of interactive platforms, like we're not a social media company, we're not a video sharing platform, so we don't see the volume that others are seeing. But to that extent, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing something about it and that we can't take a stance as well.
Thank you. Dr. Moreno, you had thought that you might bring us the National Academy's report on bullying and some recommendations that apply there, and then perhaps another report on the usage of media. So.
Sure. So I'm an adolescent medicine physician and researcher at the University of Washington and Seattle Children's, and my research focuses on the intersection of adolescent health and technology. But today my main role is to be here as a representative of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. I was a committee member on the Committee for the Biologic and Psychological Effects of Peer Victimization. And as a committee, we spent over a year reviewing the current state of the science on the literature surrounding bullying as well as cyberbullying. And we generated this report from that year of work that really represents a compendium of the current state of the science regarding bullying and cyberbullying. And our study staff lead, Susan Lemenestrel, is here today, and she brought me an extra copy, so if anyone wants one after, I have an extra. And one of the charges that we had as a committee was to come up with recommendations after reviewing this huge body of science and clinical literature. And from those recommendations, we directed one of those 7 recommendations. We were only able to present 7 total recommendations from this huge compendium. And in a slightly unusual move, one of the recommendations is directed at social media companies. And that's with the recognition that technology platforms today represent the second most common place where bullying takes place. We recognize through our review of the literature in this report that most of the science has focused on school-based bullying, but that in today's world, much of what adolescents experience, they experience online and often on social media platforms. And so I'll briefly just read the recommendation, which reads, social media companies, in partnership with the Federal Partners for Bullying Prevention Steering Committee, should adopt, implement, and evaluate on an ongoing basis policies and programs for preventing, identifying, and responding to bullying on their platforms, and should publish their anti-bullying policies on their websites. So I'm happy to have further discussion about this report as our panel moves along.
When you talk about that from the standpoint of that report particularly, recommending that they post, pursue, and follow up, do you dive into each of those 3 categories in any particular depth in terms of the kind of technology or recommendations that you might make to a social media outlet?
I think that a big emphasis on what we wanted this recommendation to come across as is the partnership piece. The idea that we're all navigating this new landscape together, and that our hope would be that these types of approaches would be done in collaboration and partnership with each other, as well as with the federal partners for bullying prevention, so that nobody feels like they're having to reinvent the wheel on their own.
Well, as it happens, moving to social media, Ms. Cortez, one of the things that I think is entirely evident now is just and it wasn't that many years ago, even at these groups where we were seeing 2% or 8% of people engaged in certain kinds of things, is the now absolutely pervasive, and I mean that in a very positive way, pervasive aspect of social media. What is the approach now? I know you have new initiatives at Twitter. What are the new approaches going on there? Just recognizing this new universe.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm here to represent Twitter, but I have worked on safety in other companies for a number of years. And the first thing I wanted to say is just when you look around this room, the number of safety partners that are here that have been really shaping the way that industry takes action is absolutely incredible and very unique in the world. So thanks to FOSI for bringing everybody together. I think today we have heard a lot of research, like Amanda presented a very clear picture, so did Congresswoman Clark and Ambassador Russell. And I just wanted to say from the get-go that in every technological company that I have worked on, we have felt a great deal of responsibility. We have created platforms that have disrupted the way that people communicate. Yeah. And as a consequence, you also see bad actors who try to abuse this power of communication for harmful purposes. And so we do have this responsibility, and I have seen a development in the way these tech companies approach the issue. In the case of Twitter, I joined 3 years ago, and Twitter is a different platform because we're public, we are open, and we're conversational. And so we see 1 billion tweets every 2 days. So you can imagine that is an incredible amount of content flowing through the platform. And it took 3 years, 2 months, and 1 day to see that first billionth tweet, but we're now seeing this every 2 days. And so what's really key is for us to engage with experts on the prevention and the detection, but also on the empowerment piece so that users know how they can protect themselves to prevent engagement with harmful content. You have mentioned the latest developments, and we've had hate speech policies for as long as I have been in the company. Just very similar to what Jacqueline was describing for Microsoft, we have our Twitter rules, which are public, and they are public because we want the users to also understand what our expectations of behavior are. And I think that's very key to this discussion. We often tend to think about the worst type of troll, but the reality is that the majority of the negative content that we see comes from normal users that on normal interactions have been triggered by something and they start engaging in a non-constructive way. And we as society have to think about how do we bring those people back into compliance? How do we show them how to engage in a constructive way in these communication platforms? And so at Twitter, what we're looking at is conduct. And we had this discussion just a second ago, like hate speech versus hateful conduct. On Twitter, you'll always see that we refer to hateful conduct because we're looking at a pattern of behavior. How is a person behaving on the site? How can we bring them back into compliance? Or are they in the 10% of any extreme ideology where you can't bring them back and by engaging in counter-narratives and counter-speech? And so over the last few weeks, what we have done is clarify more the way we enforce our rules. We have retrained everybody who's looking at abuse cases. The way abuse happens in one country is different to the way abuse happens in another country. And actually, one example I always like to give is something that we saw in India a couple of months ago, where you would have certain users saying to women, take a bus. If you see that in the US, it might not mean much, but for anybody who's familiar with the sexual assault case in Delhi a couple of years ago, in India that has a different implication.
Occurred on the bus.
Exactly. So for us, the key is context, is being clear with the users, having very clear rules, having a strong enforcement, and support in a way that scales. You may have the perfect rule, perfectly drafted, but if you can't enforce it in a way that scales, you're not really going to help the community blossom.
Mr. Gonzalez, some specific programs in your company. Can you talk about those for a moment?
Yeah, look, a little bit of context. I'm here representing AT&T, a company that is committed to providing awareness, right, and education on these issues, given that we are the enabling connectivity for a lot of what we've been talking about here. But I'm almost here as a parent today. I'm a parent of a 13 and 10-year-old, two wonderful kids, and this is the first time that as a career has intersected with my personal life, and I feel very fortunate to be able to bring the two together. Anybody that has young kids like mine that are in that transitionary period sees a lot of this happen. The time they spend with technology, the bullying isn't physical, the dialogue isn't direct, it's indirect. And it's important that we bring awareness and education not only to the kids, but to the parents on what that next social media platform is, what roasting might be within a group chat, why that's important. And I think AT&T has done a phenomenal job at really kind of leaning into these social issues. It started with the It Can Wait campaign about texting and driving. It's now moved on to this particular topic with two programs that are just fantastic. One, brand new, called the Later Hater campaign. It's a social campaign intended to empower the youth that is being bullied or that is bullying to speak out and to speak out in the forum where this is all happening on social media with the hashtag that they're familiar with and in the language that they're familiar with. And so Later Hater is a social campaign. We're on a variety of social platforms, and we're bringing in social influencers to go out and really speak about the topic of cyberbullying. And then the second is a really great program that we have in partnership with Common Sense Media to, again, educate parents and educators on the topics of media usage, types of content that appeal to different audiences. We take their ratings for media content, apply them in our media products, our DirecTV services as an example, to give parents an idea of what that particular show might or might not include for their kids. And beyond that, there's a Digital U. Digital U is a platform, an educational platform where we partner with Common Sense to provide data and information for parents, educators, and even our own employees to go out and really educate on the topics that we're discussing here today.
Great. Well, I want to do that dreaded moderator moment where I ask you the multi-part, multi-dimensional question that, and I hope you'll bear with me, but it occurs to me, both before this panel and listening to you, that how much of the future responsibility is providing tools for others to use, and how much of it is tools that you have to assume on your own and create your own? And I want to ask that question, this is the complicated part, but in the context of the growth of interconnectivity, for lack of a better term, where we're going to see more growth outside of areas in the next 10 or 15 years in parts of the world with not this sort of, frankly, Western European, North American value structure, that where there was common terminology, common understanding, as you, I think, accurately pointed out with India. A phrase here that would attract no attention at all had huge volume of meaning in India. But when you look at that division of responsibility and education and guidelines, for example, it's going to become incredibly complicated as more and more world users really dominate the content and the use of social media and the web. Where do you see first the responsibility ultimately now in the future? Is it for you developing tools or providing tools to others? And then try to put that in that global context, because I think it's a problem we haven't adequately addressed here, because we've seen it grow up sort of San Francisco to now in Europe, and all of a sudden, oh, the rest of the world is going to be here. And now that I've thoroughly terrorized everybody, who would like to jump in on that first and pick any part of that question? But I think it's a very important dichotomy that when we talk about tools and empowering people, a new group of people is coming on board? Please.
I'll start.
You certainly are in your company global in a way that not many others are.
Sure. And we say this about many aspects of online safety, but it really is a shared responsibility. Everyone has a role to play. It's not just the technology companies. It's the technology companies to create the tools, to put the safeguards in place, to give the guidance, to educate about the risks. And it's also a governmental responsibility. It's law enforcement has a responsibility. And of course, the user, his or herself, and as families have a responsibility. So everyone has a role to play to create sort of that, the kind of social norms and the kind of atmosphere and the kind of web experience that everyone wants. And it's not going to be the same for everyone.
Yeah.
There's going to be changes, and we're going to have to manage through those as we do offline as well.
I would add something else to that, which is as these platforms evolve, safety needs to be at the design and at the core. When I first joined Twitter, you couldn't share links, you couldn't share images. And so we didn't have reporting mechanisms for those, and we didn't see abuse to the extent that we see it now. So I see safety as an ongoing task. As the sites evolve, we have to continue to provide safety mechanisms, and I think that will always be our responsibility. What I think civil society is the key player is when it comes to education, because we are talking to an adult audience. A lot of us are not digital natives, and oftentimes we're talking in a patronizing way to those digital natives. And we have to think about how safety is going to look in 10, 15, 20 years' time when the digital natives are the main players and they are in these roles. And so I would just love to see how we start incorporating them in the discussions, but also how safety will remain at the core, but civil society, who really are the experts on that education piece, can help us incorporate them in the discussions globally, not just in the US, but as you said, around the world.
Tony, you said you came here as a parent as well. How much will this be educating adults, educating parents? And the dimension changing as more and more people grew up in the environment? We're going to see, what I would hope would be a blossoming of understanding about how these platforms work from people who weren't digital natives to people who are? Or...
Yeah, look, that's the passion point that struck me on this particular topic. Is I'll share with you a personal story about our family. I mean, we were on a train, and I needed a device to check on the Giants score, and mine was dead. I grabbed one of my kids' devices and connected and went on the browser, and I hate to say that I was mortified by what I saw, but I was shocked by what they're looking for. And it's all, when you think about it, it's so innocent, but what they get back is not so innocent. And I went through a bit of a moment where I said, okay, I'm going to strangle this kid. Not literally.
A very shared parent moment I'd like to point out in this group.
Not literally. And I stepped back and I said, she's probably more mortified than I am.
Yeah.
And so I actually looked internally to myself and said, I am in this space, and I didn't know how to put these preventive measures in place, or didn't even think to put these preventive measures in place. And instead of looking for the Giants score, they lost, by the way, that day. A common thing in New York these days. I went on, I searched for, how to restrict an iDevice. And I did it. We had a conversation, and we enacted rules within our family as to how you engage with those devices. So we didn't punish, we used it as a way to teach. And so that was the moment where I realized, if I'm in this space and I forgot to even think about that as a gate, what about folks that are not? And so I think it's not just parents, I think it's educators as well.
And Dr. Marino, also healthcare providers. That was something we chatted briefly about. What's the role of that other part of structure, which again, I think as a parent, I would not have thought to talk to the doctor who saw my children when they were young, the pediatrician. Yeah. But we've seen that in other areas where suddenly they got engaged in certain campaigns about health that were, by a sort of common understanding, like, oh, my doctor does that. There was a study, I think, and what do we know from that health standpoint, that's
Sure.
appropriate to talk
I
about
think
right
that
now.
if we think about physicians and pediatricians in particular interacting with kids, we're really interested in the whole health of the child. And so I think it really becomes incumbent upon us to do check-ins with kids at their health supervision visits about how their life is going both online and offline. And as an adolescent medicine physician, I can tell you I see kids every week who come in for stomach aches or headaches, and if you take time and drill down a little further, you find out that the headache started when they were bullied online, or the stomach ache started when someone shared an embarrassing photo on Facebook. And so I think that we as physicians are coming to the understanding that the online world and the offline world have this really important effect on kids' health, both their mental health and their physical health. But what we struggle with a lot is that many of us as physicians weren't trained to counsel in this area. And so, for example, at the American Academy of Pediatrics, we've been working on building tools that physicians can use and can offer to parents to be able to help them navigate that world together.
My background is largely in journalism, and one of the things that I've watched a sort of arc in terms of safety is not quite the word, but discourse, civil discourse, was the great hope that when we all put those little chat areas below stories, I think a lot of journalists thought that first people would be talking to the reporter or about the issue, and there was a great rise in the number of those
I love
rooms.
reading those.
They're good. Where they still exist, because one of the things that has been disappointing to me, and I do the same thing. If they're there, I read them. Was the arc is now down, where people are getting off because 5 comments down, it diverges completely from the point of the story and into insults and somebody's conversation carried over from an entirely different venue. So I would say if I rated the civil discourse capability now within journalism, I would say it's less than it was 10 years ago because of this pullback from chat rooms. And I want to say that this is my last moment. I'm going to depend on the rest of you after this and offer an opportunity to talk to these great people. In terms of online safety, you have a great many efforts going now for a period of time, and then you have your work, but you have this explosion and, again, the ubiquitous nature of it, just exponentially. If you all predicted it, I'm in awe because I know I didn't see it coming in the way that it spread. Safer or not today for a young person to go online? Just generally, from each of your very different perspectives, I think. Is it safer or more dangerous?
I'd like
do you have a way
I'd like to
yeah.
think that it's safer,
Okay.
but there, again, under that notion of shared responsibility
Right,
and everyone's responsibility, there are safeguards that can be put in place. There are guardrails that can be put in place. So there are tools there, and we can create the tools, but it's that, can lead a horse to water kind of conversation, right? So we have to make sure that they're being used. Yeah. And I think the conversation with the parent or the physician or that kind of open communication about what could go wrong, and we all talk about building resilience in the child to make sure that things aren't perfect online, things aren't perfect in life, and they have to be equipped mentally and physically and emotionally to be able to deal with those kinds of issues. So it takes.
Yeah, and again, I realize that it may be an unanswerable question, but reaching toward an answer is really where I'm at.
And I would say safer, and then just the level of opportunity that exists by the virtual transformational power of technology and everything that they have that I never had.
Yeah.
I would agree. Safer but fragmented, and fragmenting more every day.
Interesting. Right.
So no social networks, young child, unless I give you the permission. Hey, I just signed up for Musical.ly. That's not a social network. Well, what do you mean you just signed up for Musical.ly? Are you sharing videos? Yeah, but that's not a social network. That's not Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I don't have one of those. But well, what's Musical.ly? What's XYZ app, and what are the safeguards? And so I think helping parents and educators stay just aware of today they're using Snapchat, tomorrow they're going to be using something else. And these things emerge overnight.
It's that speed
right?
of
And Musical.ly for me was that example where, again, I'm in this space. I see these companies come in and out. And, she just thought it was okay. That she didn't need to come ask.
Because it's not a social media by definition.
By definition. And so I think helping, the safeguards are in place, knowing educating on what these destinations are, if you will, and then how to safeguard within them is the battle.
And I would agree. I think we are safer, and I tend to think of it that I think we're in the third phase of our internet use. And to me, the first phase was dominated by the early adopters. So especially in social media land, it was mostly adolescents and young adults. And I think what I heard a lot from parents at that time was, it's only online. At least he's sitting on MySpace and not out causing trouble. And so to me, it was as though you took a giant warehouse in every city and crowded it with teenagers and said nothing bad could ever happen here. So to me, that was the first phase. And I think the second phase was we as adults joined the party. We got our iPhones, we got our Blackberries, we started going on Facebook, and we saw that reflected in the data of the rise of adults on social media. But the downside was many of us started acting like the adolescents that we saw on social media. And so to me, I think today we're in this third phase where we're saying, what are the values and culture that we want to take from our offline world, and what can we represent online? How can we be accountable to ourselves and our identities, both online and offline? And I think that's what is represented by the quality of discourse you're hearing today.
I would say it's a world of endless opportunities. So when I look back at the resources that I had when I was a teenager to the resources that are available nowadays, it's day and night. Yeah. But of course, with those new opportunities comes new challenges, and it's how we address these challenges together as the technology companies, civil society, experts, academia, etc. So I would say really it's a combination. I think there's a lot more resources. Even when I just look at tech, when I first started working on this space, safety wouldn't necessarily come as a first thought. It was more an afterthought. Right. It's like, we're going to allow images to be shared. Oh, we just saw a first case of abuse. While now it would be, we're going to enable images to be shared. We have to provide a mechanism for people to report immediately. So I think the companies are better prepared now, but as you say, teenagers will shift from one platform to another, and it's a shared responsibility for us to share our learnings with all of the other companies that are coming after us.
Very good. Questions now. Do we have microphones, or how do we, forgive me, I didn't, we have a mic, so wait so everybody can hear you, and we'll start there, and we'll sort of swing back forth. I'll try to recognize as many people as we can.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Sheree Mitchell. I formed the first organization called Digital Sisters in 1999 to get young girls of color online. One of our biggest challenges during that time was the parents. And the challenge that I still see now in what we're talking about in this particular space, because I still see that the girls of color are coming online, but they're being attacked a lot. What I don't see is the diversity that goes with the tools to address the things that, Patricia, you talked about, the, take a bus perspective, coming from different communities that have a different form of harassment. One example I'll give is the things that I see that happens to moms of color is being threatened. Their child is being threatened by saying, hope your child doesn't become a hashtag. That is a death threat. And so to the point that I want to get at in terms of safety, one of our biggest problems is still the diversity side of this. And how do we address that? Because we bring our civil society behavior online.
That is a great point. And actually, in our most recent announcement, when we talked about hateful conduct, we didn't change the external facing rules. Those remain. We protect people by, the protected categories that are in the UN Charter of Human Rights. But one of the things that we did, and this has taken the last, best of 12 months, is the hiring of people from diverse backgrounds with different perspectives, but also coming from, as I said, different markets, because abuse takes place in a different way. And so even on the enforcement side, it's extremely important to have a very diverse team that can understand how does abuse look like in Japan? How does it look like in the US? How does it look like in Colombia or Mexico? So that's one of the measures that we started looking at. But secondly, actually in February, we launched a Trust and Safety Council, which is really a framework that enables us to get feedback from organizations that are working on different issues that touch upon safety, coming from many different backgrounds. And that has it's really been a game changer, because we're not talking to just like the FOSIs of this world, but we're also talking to Black girls who code and other organizations who, as you say, are being targeted more than others. And we see this in our own data. We see that there are specific groups of the population that are getting targeted more than others. And we have to include better protection mechanisms within our side, but also ensure that we're having that dialogue. So I would just connect with you after, but I would say if you want to be one of the people that gives us feedback, that's my job. That's why I do outreach, is precisely to create a bridge of communication and ensure that we have as many diverse voices as we can, and we understand how abuse happens differently depending on the background where you come from.
And please, Jen.
And I would just point out that I'll preview something that we're planning for Safer Internet Day 2017, which I'm sure all of you know is February the 7th, and some of you in the room have been apprised of some of these developments. But I was shocked this morning to see how strikingly similar research that we've conducted is with what Amanda showed earlier. We're trying to make the case for what we're calling digital civility. And come Safer Internet Day, we're going to have specific research in 14 countries about 17 different risks across 4 categories. The research is just going to be, as Stephen always references, that baseline evidential foundation from which we are going to hopefully make this case for digital civility, where we're going to have various assets, various smart practices for various stakeholder groups, whether it be technology companies or members of civil society or academics or policymakers or what have you, to start that conversation and to start that dialogue of building that platform. And there could be various initiatives, various programs, but just rooted in that concept of, can we do a little bit better with each other online? Can we have certain values that we embrace? Is this a time for instituting some kind of social norms, or at least some best practices that we could discourage some of the personal threats and discourage the name calling? Can we still have free and open debate, but again, sans the prior? So I would just, we've released 2 blogs already. We talked to both teens, 13 to 17 in 14 countries, as well as adults 18 to 74. And we asked them about their experiences and interactions with 17 different online risks. And very similar, again, to what Amanda was referencing, we had 65% of all of those polled said that they had experienced at least one of those online risks. And it led to various things. For adults, it led particularly to offline consequences, loss of trust in others, stress, increased stress, sleeplessness. The one positive note in that, though, was that adults said that about a third, again, about 29-30%, said that when something negative happened to them, their reaction was that they tried to offer more constructive criticism to others the next time something happened. So I think there is a little ray of light there, but I just preview that and ask you to look out for it. Again, we've released 2 preliminary looks at the research in our blogs, one looking at the teens' time to the back-to-school time frame, and then one looking at the adults' time to post-U.S. election, and time to World Kindness Day, which I didn't know about, but it happened on November the 13th.
Sounds like a very kind thing. Do we have someone with the microphone already, or can we go? We'll go on this side and come back if we could. So here.
Thank you. Catherine Steiner-Adair, Harvard Med School, author of The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age. I think one thing that I see over and over in my research in America and in other countries as well that we have to keep in mind, which has been mentioned a little bit here today, on the issue of safety. Where are we safer or not? I think another way of looking at the question is also, where is the fallout bigger? Because the psychological fallout of harassment and abuse when it's done online is actually more impactful than face-to-face. In other words, in research with girls and young women who have had sexual abuse, bad hookups, they say that is not even rape. That is not as damaging psychologically in the long term for them as a very bad online experience. So there's a whole other realm that we have to add to the conversation, which is what is the consequences psychologically long term of cruelty, harassment, and abuse online, and then how in schools and how through psychiatrists, psychologists, support networks do we also make it safe for people to get help and provide the services for them to get help, which is a whole new area that we have to pay attention to. As we've seen since smartphones have come out, a huge spike in just anxiety, period.
Yeah.
And a
Do
lot
you
of
have
this
a
is the
specific
psychological
question
fallout.
to one of these folks based on
And
their
my
work?
question
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
my question
Please,
is,
and just to move us to get as many people
what
as we
are
can.
you thinking about in terms of creating support of information, education, et cetera, to people who are struggling in this way? You know, what are the programs you're going to create for educators, and where, you know, what's the for doctors, et cetera, because this is a huge issue that we need to also address.
So I'll give you, I mean, I glanced over the Digital U program that AT&T kind of puts out there. It's digitalu.att.com. And again, we partner with Common Sense Media, who is an expert in the space, to provide the tools to educate. And so, just as an example, we've done 140 events across the country using that platform and that material and that data to go and educate the community. And it's our employees going out and taking that information and educating parents and educators and senior citizens and families. I mean, you name it, right? And so lots of data. How do we synthesize the data, package it, and empower people that have passion for this particular topic, which is an important one, to go out and educate? So I think that's one. Second, the kids themselves can be can carry the message because they're the ones living it. And so, as an example, we just did a wonderful thing of really marrying what I would, our entertainment side, the media side of our business, with the connectivity side of our business. We partnered with the Tyler Clementi Foundation to do some polling in New York. Step one. Step two, partnered with the American High School Film Festival to create a film invitational that allows high school kids to come in and create documentaries telling these stories, most of which are their own. And I had a hard time watching some of these films, but for their peers to be able to tell their stories visually and creatively was extremely impactful. And so, look, this isn't about AT&T per se, this is about this topic, but I can tell you as a company, and again, coming here as a parent, I'm extremely proud of what we're doing to do just what you're suggesting, which is educating parents, educators, and allowing these kids themselves to educate the community.
Very good. We have a question on the other side of the room over there.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Boudre. I'm the Director of Library Programs for DC Public Schools. And I am thrilled to say that every one of our library media specialists, that we have one in every school, is being tasked with teaching digital citizenship using common sense media education curriculum, which is fabulous. But I think one of the challenges that we have, and there is an ask as opposed to a question here, one of the challenges that we have, especially as librarians, is that digital citizenship, as with information literacy, which is our subject, is taught as an other. It is a separate thing. And my frustration and my ask 4 years ago when I came to this conference was, can we please stop saying digital citizenship and talk about teaching people to be citizens in a digital world? And it's a very different concept. But my ask is there, what ways can companies and corporations and organizations really push education to ensure that this is included in every single content area, in conversation, not treated as this separate thing that my librarians are going to hit, 2 and 3 hours over the course of a year so that we are, check the box digital citizenship certified. And, so my ask is, what can we do to be able to work together to make this a more comprehensive approach?
And I'd have to say, over the years I've been associated with this, that's the message that keeps coming through, is it's not somebody else's responsibility, or it's not a single tactic, if I'm, again, being the amateur on the moment here, but turning to the experts, what's the response to that ask?
Well, one thought to me that I'm reflecting on is that what you're describing also sounds similar to some of the questions and thoughts we had as a committee in thinking about this bullying report and wrestling with the idea that some of the scientific literature says cyberbullying is this new thing. It is the worst thing ever. It's happening everywhere, and it's totally different than bullying. And some of the other literature saying, hey, here's traditional bullying. It often happens in schools, and we think that it's now migrating to these online platforms. So I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're saying this is the worst thing ever online or this is the worst thing ever offline. And I think the more that we can bring those two worlds together, as you mentioned, to talk about citizenship, to talk about kindness, to talk about bullying as something that happens online and offline. And that opens us up to this huge new world of resources where, for example, in our report, we talked about being able to learn from some of the successful bullying interventions that have happened in schools and see what lessons can we take that we could apply online. So if we view this as one huge connected world instead of two separate ones, we can draw on resources from both the online and offline literature.
If I may add something there, I agree with you. And at Twitter, we have worked a lot with Common Sense Media, but we also have Ann Collier that is working with I Can Help Now. We have Alan Simpson in the room who's been helping us create a guide for educators. And I think that the importance here is not to separate. It's not necessarily about what goes wrong with the technology. It's how to also use the technology. Because the reality is, a lot of the educators that we engage with will say, the students are using this. How can we incorporate it so that it's not just the negative harassment has taken place, we have to address the harassment, but more, how can we be a part of the conversation and how can this be a tool that can be utilized for education? And so in our case, through Alan, but also in San Francisco in particular, we have the Neighbor Nest, which is our community center. It's placed in the Tenderloin, and we have been partnering with not just Common Sense Media, but United Playas to work with different schools where we're talking to the students, the parents, and the teachers in classes that, of course, wouldn't scale globally, but we're looking at how can we use Twitter for good? How can we utilize all of our employees worldwide and create this curriculum that is more about Twitter in education, which addresses safety too, but is wider than that, and is the possibility of the technology, and to bring that to a global stage.
We have time for a question there and one more, I think, and then unfortunately, we'll be out of time to move things along.
Thank you. Ann Collier with, my latest thing is social media helpline for schools. We're working very hard to take it national right now. A number of us in the room have served on a number of national task forces about internet safety, and one that was, I can't believe, almost a decade ago at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center now. One of the major findings of the Lit Review that was done and led by Dana Boyd back then found that, the primary risk that young people face is cyberbullying, and that it's an emotional risk, right? It's a psycho-emotional social risk that young people face online. And what I'm astonished by is that we don't talk about social literacy enough. We always default to digital literacy, but it's social emotional learning that prepares children to deal with the issues online that they face. So I'm asking you that. Why don't we associate media literacy? Absolutely. That's a form of safety. And social literacy with safety in digital spaces.
I think some of your programs are actually addressing that, if I'm not mistaken, just what I was able to do some research on. Can you perhaps Jacqueline might talk?
Exactly. That's precisely one of the things that we're advocating for with this new digital civility campaign. It's what the other questioner asked about as well, that integration. There are opportunities within a regular school curriculum to integrate these types of messages for the digital world, for the social media world, for technology in general. Because when it comes to the kids, as we all know, it is in fact one world. It's not segmented in any way. It may be fragmented in some instances, but it's not segmented. It is one world, and all of it needs to be addressed at those opportunities. But yeah, we're big proponents of social and emotional learning, of course, in the right context. It's not going to work for every country of the world and every culture, but it is a good starting place for sure.
And it also forms the backbone of most of the successful school-based bullying programs. So I think it's another great example where we can draw from what works in the offline bullying world and translate that into the online bullying world instead of reinventing a wheel.
Thank you. Again, we could, I think, hear from all four, but we're going to move to our last question just to keep the program on time. So we have someone here.
Hi, thank you again for all being here together. My name is Jennifer Bilbrow, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. I have a social media company, but I'm a grassroots, on the ground, teaching moms and dads, schools, churches, all over my community about online safety, social media safety. So my question for all of you and for FOSI, I guess, is there one resource or one place where you can go where all of the information that all of you have in this room is curated? Like all of this is so fragmented and separated and not together, and there's so many amazing tools, but how can we get it all in one place so when someone asks me a question, I can say, you need to go here, not 17 different websites to find that content?
Well, if I may, I think that is part of what FOSI's mission is to collate a lot of this information and make it easily available. Steve, you'd give me a thumbs up. Thank God I didn't say the wrong thing. But you know, that in an increasingly either fragmented or segmented world, I mean, that's really an outstanding question. You know, I think one of the things that we got very accustomed to early on was that we could type in and up comes 50,000 things. Now it's 500,000 things, and really where they're more focused, and it goes to a question of validation about news sources. You know, we're beginning to get overwhelmed, from my perspective, again, in just delivering news and information. We're beginning to get overwhelmed by this tidal wave, again, in ways we never dreamed would be possible. We looked at all the great ideas of having all this wonderful information, and we forgot about the curators who helped us sort through it in the earlier days. Maybe only between 20 or 30 sources, but now, how do you do it for 2 million or was it 1 billion tweets a
1
day?
billion tweets every 2 days, yes.
You know, of what of those do I need to read? I honestly, you know, I mean, in all honesty, all of them. Well, thank you. Well,
Mine
I'll
are
be
pretty
back.
good, I would say, so maybe you want to follow me there.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Let me say so myself.
She's your curator.
Yeah, but I think you know, that is a great challenge, and that may be a challenge for, in different ways, everybody on this platform, to begin to help everybody sort through all the clutter, because you have questions you have to answer now. I assume you all have challenges right now, and I know in talking to people dealing with fake news, and since it came up in the last election cycle, is just how do we address that with so much flooding in from everywhere, and how do you parse it? Any other responses to?
Yeah, I mean, I would say FOSI.org for sure, but beyond FOSI, you can look at what some countries have done. Like the UK, for instance, has the UK's Council. It's a government force that brings together academia, civil society, tech, and we provide them with a lot of information. Everybody that is part of UKIS would provide them with information. So that's like a wonderful result in the UK. If you look at Australia, the e-Safety Commissioner has similar resources. And just today, FOSI in their recommendations spoke about the creation of the e-Safety Commissioner and a task force. And I think that's a very good way to bring a lot of information together. The countries where we have seen it have been very effective in bringing all of those really together. And of course, in the meantime, you have all of the safety centers of the tech companies. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're looking for resources from academia or different boards. But maybe that's something that we should lobby for with Stephen's support, you know, like that creation of a government body that can bring together that wealth of information and experts.
Or it could be another section of grid.
Well, there we are. Stephen, I think we're to you. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you very much, Gene. Thank you, panel. Thanks for the FOSI plugs and grid as well. We do attempt to try and bring this together. It is an extraordinary task. I've been in this field for 20 years, and usually my 20-year-old daughter is more informed about a lot of this stuff than I am. But it is something that we take very seriously, and we keep trying to collate and put together through our Good Digital Parenting project, specifically aimed at parents, to try and bring them the urgent, relevant material that they need. but also the proposals that are on the table, which is to ask our friends here in Washington to be a bit more joined up, a bit like UKISS. I wanted to call it USKISS, but I was told that was not a good idea. And the eSafety Commissioner, of course, is a good friend of ours, Julian Grant in Australia, and of course, Baroness Joanna Shields in the UK, both of whom were invited here today, and I wanted to use them as a good example of what, for instance, this country could do. So watch this space. So don't get up just yet. You got up very well earlier, so thank you for that. But I just have a couple of announcements. We are going into breaks, and we have the Internet of Families in room 709, which is there-ish on this floor. We have Reaching and Teaching Good Digital Parents upstairs in room 802. We have Politics, Policies, and Online Privacy also upstairs in room 807. This will then run to 1 o'clock. We will have lunch, and then we'll go back into groups at 2, and we will be back here at 3:15. And so now I'm going to direct my comments to the folks, those of you watching at home or in your offices or so on. We're going to shut this off in a moment. Then we'll be back here at 3:15 for the final sessions. I want to pick up on one thing that was talked about in the panel. And that brilliant question, Gene, that you came up with, and I ended up scratching my head about, is the internet safer now than it was, I'm going to say 10 years ago, because we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. I would challenge you all, between now and lunchtime, to tweet out an answer to that. Is the internet safer now than it was 10 years ago? And tweet it out with hashtag FOSI 2016. We'll collate some of the answers, because actually there were some fascinating answers. Here, I turned to Sarah and just said yes, in that, yes, it's both safer and not safer. In other words, I couldn't actually determine because we have new issues to deal with. So I'm putting that out there to you as a challenge. The other thing that hit me in the head was I don't want my child to be a hashtag. I'm still just affected by that statement. And also finally on digital citizenship, many of you will know Tessa Joles, who's done her lifetime's work on media literacy, and she and I did a taped conversation the other day about that term. And it's interesting because we named one of our conferences a few years ago, Digital Citizenship, and I said to her, I don't really use that term much anymore. I talk about citizenship in a digital age, so I was really pleased to hear you make that comment. So, thumbs up all around. Okay, folks, enjoy your next sessions, and we'll see you at lunchtime.